Councilmember Bain. Here. Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Eigner.
Here.
Councilmember Freer.
Mike is going to be late, but he said he's on the way.
Okay. And Mayor Winnick.
Here. I'll ask everybody to rise for a pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do we have anybody signed up for the open forum?
It can't be more than two.
All right. Henry Votel?
Good evening, Councilman. Say, just a question. I'm expecting several of my neighbors to also be here, and I couldn't find it when I came tonight, but I think I had written down that the workshop was going to start at 7 o'clock. From that, probably from information in that letter. So
The letter said 7.
Yeah.
But the website says 6:30.
So if we could defer for a while, let our neighbors get here, that would be
Yeah, that's
helpful.
I think that's
Bring them on the back.
acceptable with everybody. We'll just go on to
That's only fair. That's no doubt about that.
we'll just move on to item number 6, I guess.
And apologies if I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
seems like it might have been.
It's only 15 minutes anyway, so. Is that okay then, Aaron? We'll just go on to the hangar.
Go on to item number 5?
Well, I think 4 and 5 are both kind of connected, or?
No, they're not. No.
Shouldn't be.
They're different.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right, yeah, let's just do number 5 then.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do my best to stand in. Donovan's in Texas for the start of Thanksgiving here. But if you recall, at the meeting in October, we had a discussion on 2 amendments to the zoning code. I'll go through each one of those. The council had decided to table that at that point in time. So the first one applies to the construction and expansion of accessory structures on shoreland lots. And basically what that revision does is it allows someone to construct an accessory structure on a non-riparian lot as long as it's under common ownership. And in that case, the one issue that the council had talked about that has been revised since you previously looked at it was the idea that you'd have these accessory structures that were much larger than maybe a small cabin that remained on the lakeside. And so there was a provision added there that limited the amount of floor area for that to 800 square feet, whichever is smaller. So if they happen to have a 500 square foot cabin, they could put a 500 square foot accessory structure up. So so maybe we could get some feedback from the council on that ordinance, and then we could move on to detached accessory structures and non-conforming for residential property in a non-conforming district. So,
Step off for a moment.
okay. Does council have any feedback on the shoreland accessory structure?
Aaron, how does that play with if you have a detached garage and, I mean,
So if you have a detached garage, that would be your one accessory structure that you're provided. So this is basically saying you could just have the one accessory structure. It would presume that you had an attached garage on the principal structure, and you'd be creating a standalone.
but there's a lot of them, especially clear on the north side where the garage is on the other side of the road, but it's considered on the same parcel.
Yeah.
So they could not have another.
Generally, you're limited to one accessory structure if it's a contiguous parcel. Now, what I believe this also allows is that and again, I'm trying to kind of stand in here for Donovan, but it's not necessarily adjacent. You know, so like a lot of those Clear Lake examples, they're directly across the street. In this particular case, it could be a contiguous parcel or one tax parcel, but have some physical separation to it. Does that make sense?
So would they still only,
They're still limited to the one accessory
and the
structure.
garage counts as one?
As long as, if it is detached, it would. If it's attached, it doesn't count as an
If
accessory
it's
structure.
detached, that's the one.
That's your one structure.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any consideration for the lot size on there in that ordinance?
The only thing that really factors in there is that they are required to meet the various structure setbacks.
But not the impervious? I mean, does that change?
That also is, you're limited.
still
on
have to meet it.
impervious. Yeah.
Okay.
All the other zoning requirements still apply. This just basically creates a condition where you're allowed to create that accessory structure when you currently don't have that opportunity.
But if you have attached garage, then you can put up another one.
Absolutely, yeah, because
Yes, detached.
it's considered part of the principal structure. So from a zoning perspective, if you have, and we currently have limits in all properties in Forest Lake on the size of accessory structures, which are detached from the home that you can have. But nothing that is attached to the home factors into that. So if you have an attached 3-car garage, that is not considered or incorporated into your accessory structure square footage. So you could conceivably have a 3-car garage and in this case, 800 square foot accessory structure.
Providing you got the land to accommodate.
Correct.
Is the size of the attached garage limited by the size of the building? It never used to be.
I
I'm
don't
just-
believe that's the case.
I don't think so either. I just wanted to clarify that.
This draft was, just process-wise, this draft was drafted after our last council meeting, has not gone through planning commission review, or has, or what is planned?
It is not. So traditionally, you know, you get a recommendation from the planning commission, they've had their opportunity to discuss it. And then, you know, as you go through your approval process, you have the opportunity to make some adjustments. So the adjustments that are incorporated here are just trying to reflect your previous conversation on the issues.
Did this address, this did not address, though, all of the concerns from the, specifically the properties that were north of Broadway. There were a number of other concerns that I thought were kind of feedback provided.
Well, I haven't, as far as, this is just talking about the lakeshore lot component, so I'll try to highlight some of the adjustments that have been made in the revisions here, and then
Perfect.
try to pick up any others that, you know, yeah, for the stuff that is in the downtown zoning or in the business park zoning, just north of 190th. There's some additional adjustments that are made for that language, but I was just trying to, last time when we talked about it, I thought it got a little confusing because we were jumping back and forth between the two, and they're basically distinct ordinance changes, so I was just trying to kind of tighten it up to the one. Is there any other feedback on that particular?
If you, one other question, if you, because some people do, if you have a lot, but no residence on it, can you build an auxiliary structure?
No.
Because there are some, like where I live, the cabin has been torn down, their garage remains. Are they kind of, they can't do anything unless they put another residence up?
So in that case, they'd be legally non-conforming, you know, they existed, the principal structure, principal use went away, but in a new condition, you have to have a principal structure in order to have an accessory structure.
So if they wanted to add like a second garage, they couldn't do it?
If you wanted to add a garage on a piece of property that was not attached to a property with a home on it, you could not do that.
Thank you.
That's been around a long time, I think, that ordinance.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have any concerns over, any other questions or concerns over this
No, it seems like
particular
a reasonable.
Agree.
Okay. And then moving on to the second text amendment that related to accessory structures and home additions in the MU1, MU2, and business park zoning districts. If you recall, what is trying to happen there is to give people some flexibility that are currently in a situation where they are in a commercial zoning but have a residential home there. And so, Haley, can you maybe just cut me in here quickly? And just by way of example, we have a couple of homes here that will show that are impacted by that. So previously, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of that ordinance. So in this case, you've got some property, single-family homes that are in MU1 by 2nd Street Northwest, 3rd Avenue Northwest. You can see kind of in the blue, these homes are impacted with that zoning. Right now, they can't currently put an addition on, and they cannot add an accessory structure because that would represent an expansion of the residential use, which is, non-conforming based on the zoning. Other areas, I'll go to the business park district, so down toward 190th, like these homes, for example, existing homes, but with that business park zoning now, they don't have the opportunity to add accessory structures. So what we've done there is allow that to happen. The previous version that the Planning Commission put forward to you had the requirement that those could happen, but with conditional use permits with each of the structures. This version moves away from that, making it a little more flexible and limiting the residents' requirement to go through the time and expense of a CUP application. So the latest version basically makes the accessory structure expansion available by rights. So if you want to put a freestanding garage up on these properties, a freestanding shed, whatever the case might be, you do not have to go through that process. It's strictly a normal building permit and plan review that you'd have to go through there. So I think that was staff's effort to address that concern. I think those were the primary changes that we went through there. The items in red are areas that were included to address some of the city council's specific feedback here, but generally speaking, I think it's consistent with what I mentioned. So are there any additional questions you have there? That does require you to still meet the setback requirements, still requires you to meet the, the lot coverage and so on. So like any property owner, if they wanted to come in and wanted to be closer to the property line, they are in a situation where, if they didn't meet a setback, they'd have to go through a variance process, but that's a uniform condition throughout the city. Yep.
But especially the ones that are in, I'll call it the old downtown area, where the lots are small. Some of them don't have garages, and they can't meet the impervious. But you got city sewer down there, there's no way we can give them any relief so they could build a garage?
Well, just like anyone, you always have the opportunity, and we've done it before, where you can grant a variance to the impervious surface coverage requirement or the lot coverage requirement. So you certainly can do that. But like anything, anytime someone doesn't meet one of those dimensional requirements, it's a variance. Okay. Yeah.
Well, these are certainly things that we all talked about, at the last workshop on this sort of thing. And like I said before, I like garages. I like to see, if you have a place, I'd like to see a garage where people can get stuff inside, especially in this climate. So I certainly am in favor of this.
Yeah, the big change is that it's now no longer for the accessory structure is no longer a conditional use permit required. They have the opportunity to do that. So, okay, are you comfortable with putting this on the next agenda then, or?
No, with these changes, sorry, I had to run for family, but the gentleman that was here, would that bring his request into compliance? He would not need a variance, right?
Again, if you don't meet any of the dimensional requirements, if you don't meet a setback, you would continue to need a variance. But if he met all the dimensional requirements, he would not need to get a conditional use permit. So if he can meet the setbacks, which I think in at least the instance he was describing, I think that was a resolvable issue. he would not be required. But, you know, again, if any property that wants to construct an accessory structure, if they want to do it in a way that doesn't meet the lot coverage requirements or doesn't meet the front or side or rear setback requirements, they're obligated to come in and get a variance.
Sounds good to me. Go ahead, Ed.
One last question. If they have, say, they have a existing storage shed, and they remove that, that doesn't come into play, right?
Yeah, so in this case, if anything that they currently have, they're allowed to continue to maintain that because they're grandfathered in or legally non-conforming. If they happen to remove that, you know, they have the ability then to replace it with one accessory structure up to the square footage limits in the code. Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Sounds good.
Would you like me to move on to hangar E, because we're still a little ahead of 7 here?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
As far as I'm concerned, you can, yeah.
So Mayor, members of the council, as you know, during the July tornado event in Forest Lake, we sustained some damage to hangar E, and the Airport Commission has discussed that. It did take us a little bit of time in order to get the information put together, but we looked at 3 options for this. Option 1 was to complete all of the repairs. The low bid for that was $44,134. Basically, it's a lot of roof work that would be happening there, and no changes at this point in time. The tenants, you know, have the opportunity to remain, and if vacancies come up, we would continue to fill those. Option 1 represents the recommendation that was provided by the Airport Commission, so that is the approach that they would like to go, and the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust will provide us the $44,134 minus our $1,000 deductible. Option 2 that was discussed was to demo the structure. In that case, the league would provide us $22,000 for fair market value for the structure, or the depreciated value of the structure. And I would say that would require canceling the existing leases within the hangar. And as you may recall, when we did that previously, when we go through that process, we are required to provide relocation benefits under the Uniform Relocation Act. So I did consult the city attorney. That is their perspective on this as well. In talking with Dave, he feels he can do the demo at no cost, and there is probably some salvage value in the material there. So that probably would be a kind of an offset as far as the demolition expense is concerned. The upside of that advantage is it does give you the opportunity for demolition, which is likely within some foreseeable future. I know the Airport Commission spent a lot of time talking about how can we provide a rental hangar option going forward, because that is a gap that does exist out there. The disadvantage, of course, is that there is expense, so you're really not, the $22,000 likely gets eaten up in whole or part through relocation benefits, and it displaces current tenants. Option 3 was discussed as keeping the structure as it is and modifying the lease, or a variation of that would be as doing the repairs but modifying the lease. And in this case, you could do one or the other, except the $22,000 or the repair amount. You could retain the structure as it is or do the repairs. Allow the current tenants to remain with the building, but don't fill future vacancies. And then modify the leases to require future maintenance be shared by tenants, with the provision that the tenants would have the ability to cancel that if it wasn't something they're interested in. It's more of a triple net lease, similar to the lease that we have on the south building, for example. Generally speaking, unless there's an extraordinary repair, the repair cost is the cost of the tenant there. Of course, the advantage of this, it does allow you the opportunity to accommodate current tenants, but there's a transition plan for the hangar. And then it manages the cost exposure and expectations for future maintenance requests. So This does generate some revenue. Tenants in each of these hangars do pay $125 per hangar per month, which translates over the 6 hangars to $9,000 per year in revenue. And yeah, our operational expenses really vary, so it just depends. And what's not necessarily reflected in that is, Dave does spend some time. I think it varies, and maybe he can comment on that. I guess we haven't really talked about it on detail, but
Rented right now?
No, I don't think so.
Is that hangar fully rented?
it is. There is currently one vacancy that we have not filled pending this discussion, but there is a waiting list for people that are interested in doing that. So.
And the rent's been paid on that empty lot, or on that empty section, so.
He just take his
Because he-
airplane and left?
Yeah, he did, well, he sold it, so.
So I guess with that, I'd defer, the Airport Commission recommendations, option 1. Looking for council feedback. We are trying to resolve this issue. Our bid with Lonsky has got a time frame on it, so it would be helpful for us to come to some resolution on that and at least not be exposed to cost escalation. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Anybody have any thoughts on this?
Well, as part of the Airport Commission, that was part of that discussion, and there's definitely a need for rental space. There are folks that may not want to build a hangar, for instance, or whatever, or they're just getting going, and there's a very definite need for a rental hangar. And that's why, as far as I'm concerned, we should fix that building and do something within the next 5 years to get it taken care of. Just to pull it off from underneath there, the people that are there I don't think it's a good option. And it's going to be costly to move them too.
How many planes or how many rental spaces are there in Hangar E?
6 total spaces.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, my logic, seeing as I'm on that commission, was that, one, we do have tenants there. The alternative, if you took it down, you not only lose this revenue, but in all instances, correct me if I'm wrong, we'd still be faced with relocation. So why would you want to do that? You may as well fix it up and rent it out.
What are the costs associated with the relocation?
It's really variable. Unfortunately, a lot of the cost is incurred with facilitating the relocation process. So in some cases, when we did this previously, the relocation benefits were $1,000 or less, depending on what the ultimate move was. But the cost to provide the notices and go through search and, have the relocation consultant work with people were in excess of that. So I don't remember exactly how many tenants that we previously relocated with the other two, or the other previous hangars when we went through the paving project. But we spent a considerable amount of money to do that.
State helped us provide some of that money, but it's an astronomical amount of money from the.
Yeah, budget was like $65,000 or something.
Yeah,
it
doesn't help the people that are being relocated at all. It helps the people that are doing the paperwork. It's criminal.
Has there been a long-term conversation or strategy around what is the plan for long-term rental options at the airport? I know that you mentioned the 5-year horizon. I think that's given because the Hangar E is expected to have only a life of 5 additional years. But have we had conversation, or has previous councils had conversation around long-term strategy for a rental option? Or is that really what we're triggering tonight? Are we committed to that model?
It's always been part of our CIP, always. And the idea to get that thing going is the cost. It's simply the dollars and cents. It doesn't matter who does it, if it's a city does it or if it's privately owned.
Sam, can you clarify? Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold here. Can you clarify what you mean by it's always been part of the CIP? Do you mean building a new hangar there? Do you mean what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Building there's always been a space there. There's always been part of the plan to build a 15-unit rental unit there.
Is that where the T hangar is supposed to go?
That's exactly
okay.
the case.
Thank you.
And Is there, so in lieu of a rental option, is there another option that's been considered for that space that would be reason why we wouldn't make those changes? How mature is that conversation? I'm just trying to
I mean, I think
up to speed on
the
some
policy
history.
discussion from the council's perspective is, I think the working assumption is that the city is not interested in investing the 20% necessary, well, and in some cases more than that. Like the best case scenario I think you get out of a T hangar for funding is 50%, and that would be the best case scenario, and it might only apply to site prep and some other features of the project. So that's always a moving target. In terms of how the state's viewing that, and they have some low interest or no interest loan programs and things like that. But I think the working idea is that we're not looking to have city funds go into the construction of a new T hangar. And so with that working assumption, I think the commission is focused more on, is there the opportunity for a private party to construct a multi-tenant T hangar that they could pay a ground lease on, like a lot of our tenants out there, but then have spaces available that would rent. And the difficulty, of course, is that space per square foot is more expensive, and the rentals got to be more expensive to offset that, compared to $125 to hangar a plane per month. It's just not the same price point you're talking about. And so I think that's where the challenge comes in, is there an investor or an individual that's willing to do that with, and they'd need to have a certain number of commitments before they would likely do that. Or even if you could condo it out and a bunch of people got together, that hasn't quite come together yet.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
So if we took option one, would that hangar be in sufficient shape to last for a period of 10, 15 years, or is it still a short-term type scenario and we're just using the insurance money to kind of maintain what we have?
I think you get a lot of opinions on that, but Dave is the one that deals with it mostly, and I'll defer to him on that.
Well, the expense, the 40,000 is to do the repairs to the storm, so it's repairing the doors and fixing the roof and the structural stuff that happened during the storm. So if next July we have another tornado that comes through and then rips off the other doors and the other part of the roof, then you're going to have that expense again. I don't know if it's a complete roof rebuild, and some of the door fixes. So it's structurally, they're not doing structure work; they're doing the outside work.
But longevity-wise, I think that was the question, Dave.
I don't think it's buying it any more time. It's just fixing the damage that occurred at the storm.
It's making it useful for its current period, but not necessarily extending the useful life. Okay. But the out-of-pocket cost for the city is really only the $1,000 deductible, correct? So
from that perspective, yeah, there's not a significant out-of-pocket cost. I think the real policy question is, I think you could do the repair. I think the policy question for the council is do you want to continue leasing, or are you phasing it out? I think that's a policy question, because again, we do have a current vacancy. The commission would like to continue leasing it out, but when you are ready to have that conversation about phasing it out, at some point, then you are subject to relocation, moving forward. So when does that point start, where you start phasing out tenants and we can occupy it for, cold storage and in a transition period? And then, I think there's another legitimate policy question on, right now, we've received a fairly high level of maintenance requests, for the hangar, and some we can accommodate and some we have not been able to accommodate. And, we try to do as much as we can in-house, and, we haven't necessarily quantified the amount of public works time, but if you did, the amount of rent we're generating there, it's the difference is not significant.
So is it an option to do option one, but not rent out that other space, so that we're starting, so 5 years or 7 years down the line when we have to replace this hangar, we're not incurring additional relocation expenses?
That is an option, yeah.
What is the lease period right now? If you mentioned it, I missed it. I'm sorry.
All the tenants are currently month to month.
Oh, no, okay.
However, in a situation where, let's say we decided to go the demolition route, even on month-to-month leases, we're still obligated to relocation benefits.
Go ahead, Ed.
I just,
That is just because the lease exists. Is that
Correct.
Is that correct?
Right.
Could that be modified for future lease?
You can't contractually work your way out of that. It's based on some case law and, different things that influence, public facilities.
I was just going to say, seeing as we don't offer any other options because we don't have a T-hanger or someplace to go, these people are probably going to stay no matter what. I mean, unless something comes along that they can't fly. So, either way, somewhere down the road, we're going to get stuck with a relocation, the way I see it.
You're saying there's not an attrition option?
Would you, Sam? I don't think they're going anywhere. I mean, where would you get a better deal than what they got?
Yeah, that's the whole thing, but, and Jim is using it, I mean, he's the fellow that's towing banners and that sort of thing, so he wants to be there. It's a tough deal because the new buildings, anything you build new is expensive. There's no getting around it. A 15-unit T-hanger would run $400,000 or easily, with the doors and all that. And it's just, every unit have to be full in order to get any kind of a payback within 20 years. And so it's a tough deal, it really is. My statement at the airport commission was the fact that we got to do something within the next 5 years, and that's why I wanted to leave that building working as it is and do the repairs on it, so something can be done within the next 5 years.
I don't know that I would say attrition is not an option there. I mean, one, we currently have a vacancy, so attrition has happened that way. And
How long has that been vacant?
Just recently
Okay.
became vacant. And then you have one individual that has expressed interest in building new in there that just did some relocated into the vacant space, and then his space became vacant. So, I mean, these things, do have a tendency to ebb and flow. I mean, they may very well be some longer term tenants there for sure, but you can't project, when a vacancy might occur.
Well, personally, I don't think the city really needs to be in the rental business. I don't think we do very well in the rental business. And if you look at the $9,000 income we're getting off of this versus what that costs, I mean, we're losing money on it. Airport's a great airport. If it can't support a private T-hanger, so be it. I don't think that we have to financially compensate people who can't afford to build a hangar there, or if it's not financially viable for somebody to put a T-hanger there, that doesn't mean we have to put one up either. This is going to be a continuing pain. That building is an old tin shed that's ready to fall down. That's what we've got there, and we've got 5, 6 people in there, wherever, how many leases are in there right at the moment. And yeah, I think we need, number one, like Aaron said, policy. Where are we going to be in the future? I would like to see us out of the rental business. And if that means, letting them stay there for free and just, you can use it and done with it, or, we're going to fix it, or we're going to fix it part way, that's, I guess, what we got to determine. But ultimately, I'd like to, find a path to a private hangar scenario, something like that. And get something done that way. Hopefully, MnDOT would help out on that, even if it was private. But I definitely would like to see a policy that it's not going to be a public T-hanger in the future, or we're not going to be renting this out to anybody else. Tenants that are going to be there, you can stay now. We don't have an option to replace this, but are we going to spend the $44,000 to fix the building? Are we going to spend where do we want to go with it? I'd like to see the building down as soon as possible, but I really don't want to end up also spending $20,000 or $30,000 just to relocate people on top of what it's going to cost to tear it down.
One of the tenants in that building would love to build a new hangar out at the airport, but all the lots are full. That's an example of why you have to have something like that. You know, until we have to come up with a solution there too.
Yep, and that's probably more priority is to figure out, how to get some more lots put up or opened up. We have to have enough people signed up. I mean, I don't think that particular tenant is, I don't know, we even have anybody on a waiting list right now for future lots?
Well, really,
We haven't really created one at this point, just given the fact that we don't have.
It's full.
We haven't even gotten to the point of developing a concept about where the next phase of lots would be to let people reasonably get on a list,
Today we're providing an amenity, and we have an opportunity to, for only an additional $1,000 of cash today, continue to provide that amenity for a period of time. I understand we need to have a longer-term conversation about the future of rent out there. I guess I would be in favor of make the repairs. Let's have the conversation of what do we do with long-term rent. I'm concerned about, and really the conversation we need to have is that a role that we have as the city, and do we want to be the landlord, or do we want a private entity to be the landlord of a rental facility? And I'm not prepared to have that conversation tonight, but I think it's an important one to have. To me, to continue the amenity for $1,000 is worth it.
Well, the only, give me 1 second there, but we're making storm damage repairs.
Mm-hmm.
We're bringing it back to, from decrepit to shabby. That's what we're doing with it. We're not getting any of the rats out of there or any of the bats and whatever. So, we're not going to have very satisfied tenants that are in there. And I personally don't want to be a slumlord.
Are they more dissatisfied by being relocated though? I guess that would be a question. That would be a question of what do we expect those 5 tenants to? What do they want us to make move to make?
And what expectations?
They very
have
much
from
want
us.
to see the facility maintained, and I think that's the general perspective.
They want electricity in there, and they're going to want concrete floors, and they're going to want.
And I too don't care to be a slumlord, but also I think we would all agree that that is a much higher price point than what the current lease is to be able to provide that type of an amenity, and I think we'd get some pushback on that as well. So I think there's, if I'm in those tenants' shoes, I say just give me the crummy conditions I had pre-storm, because the reality is they're not leaving for other options. I wouldn't suggest that this is the long-term answer, but I'm not prepared tonight to pull the plug of the whole thing and say we're not going to fix it.
I think one of the suggestions, and I know it did receive some negative response at the airport commission meeting because, there's sensitivities around the lease and leases generally, right? And so, but one of the things I think that you can do to offset and just get into expectation management is to adjust the lease in a way that, conveys and transfers the maintenance for like over a certain threshold, whether it's $500 or, some level that you establish. You transfer those larger maintenance obligations to the tenants that are receiving the benefit. As it is right now, the airport fund is paying the $1,000 deductible even for the repairs. We've had requests for drainage improvements in and around that area that we've had to try to accommodate. We've had a request to put in electricity out there to the tune of $8,000 to $10,000. That again, we haven't done, but those desires are there, and so it's, if you're as a group of people, if you want to see those things, I mean, what's your investment in it other than, and unfortunately we're in a tough situation because even though $125 a month might not sound like a lot on its face, it's more than what people historically had paid. For a lot of years, people had paid $60, $70 a month, whatever it was. We did recently revise that in the fee schedule to $120, $125 per month, whatever it is. But if you compare that to like a storage unit at a, any place, and granted, those storage units at, private storage units, 8 by 10, are probably nicer than what they're getting out there, at least condition-wise. Size-wise, they're getting more space, you know, in proximity to an airport and so on. But there's a lot of factors that go into that. I just think our biggest concern from a staff perspective is maintaining this and managing expectations for what this is going to be until it's no longer with us.
I guess where I'm coming from is I'm more worried about that. If we do nothing, and they have a lease, and we have the wherewithal to get insurance money to fix it, I think we're under some liability they got their airplanes in there. If that thing collapses, you could have had it fixed. You could have done something.
Are there planes in there today, even without the repairs being done? Is that?
There are, and you know, it's at this point. We have asked the liability questions of the city attorney at this point.
What'd they say?
They're not particularly concerned about that. The way the leases are structured is, you know, it is in an as-is condition, and, you know, we've acknowledged that fact because even prior to this event, it is what it is. It's a metal building, metal pole building that was constructed in the 1960s that is not airtight. It's not rodent-proof. It's not, you know, waterproof or anything like that.
No, but it's had storm damage, and you have the wherewithal to fix it.
Right.
I guess I come back to, I think, Mara, I think you had some very good points about trying to figure out where we're going in the future with this. I think the best thing right now is to just move forward with completing the repairs. I share your concern, Mayor. I don't think that the city should be in the rental business, but we are, and so right now we would have a significant cost to get out of it. So with that, I think we move forward, but I just hope we would not fill any more spots because all it's going to do is cost us if we get a T-hanger at a different point in time or tear something down. It's going to cost us more money, and I think that's just you can take the $44,000 and add, you know, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for that one individual, you know, that you're bringing in for literally, you know, $125 a month.
All right, well, if we go ahead and go with the repairs, I guess I would just like, you know, understanding of the tenants that are there, a letter going out to them, you know, stating that, you know, storm repairs are gonna be made, but, you know, the hangars are gonna be in as-is condition. And, yeah, that, you know, we're not planning any further expenses there. I'd also like the council's input back to the airport commission that, you know, either, yes, we support a public T-hanger in the future, or we want to support a private T-hanger in the future.
I think and I think the question is, it's more than just supporting a public T-hanger. It's how much subsidy paid for by the city. I mean, what's the subsidy of that? I mean, we can say we could agree rental, but it's a question of how much is subsidy. And I'm a little concerned if the expectation is being set based off of square footage for a rent or a storage unit. I would look at it more like, you know, a comparison of what would it cost to have a boat slip, and you can't have a boat slip for $125 a month. So it, you know, I think there's a conversation of what do the overall economics look like that we need to have.
I think according to our fee schedule, some people are paying more to rent the band shell than these people are paying for a whole month.
Yeah, I think to your point, if that was to happen, we would the fee schedule is divided out so much for each hangar,
right? And
that we would have to set that fee schedule in advance, and I think we do that before we agree to any type of construction. And I remember getting burned once, and I still think that it should be private, but at least it's open for discussion.
My general impression, and we can get the information pulled together, is that given the limited support the state would likely provide in a T-hanger condition, you are not going to be interested in a public city-owned T-hanger.
No. The state, they already said that they would not help pay for the hangar at all. they would give you an interest-free loan or something like that, and they might help with the taxiways, but that's it.
Right.
And they may cost share 50/50 on like the ground prep or something.
Right,
But,
yeah, and it's a very small
but as you
amount.
get into the actual structural piece of it, that's 100% you. And my
Yeah.
impression is that's not where we're at.
I guess that, sorry.
I'm
The only other thing I'd like to
Challenge.
mention, and that's Sam, you put it very well when you said after the last project, the city has no desire, no taste, how'd you put it? No taste.
No, there's no, yeah, there's, yeah, something like that. It's a big project either way, and if there was, and even privately, I mean, you'd have to come up with enough tenants for the bank to say, yeah, this is a good idea, so how do you do that? I've often thought about the condoing concept. I think that's a great idea. You still have to have people signed up before you could even think about it, It's a big deal, so.
Well, maybe we should look at taking that off of the airport CIP if it's still on there then and refocus towards a privately owned hangar condo type scenario out there.
I think also to Sam's point, it's part of also the overall, what is the overall plan for, additional development out there and to have those conversations together.
Yeah.
We've got a great new airport engineer to help us out with that, so we'll work on that. And the idea of the CIP actually will come forward in the future. The commission's still working on it, but it needs to be submitted by February, and so I think you'll have the opportunity to review that in advance of that.
So the consensus is to go ahead with the repairs and making sure the tenants are aware that
We're not putting any more into
what
it.
you get.
And I'm hoping that we have consensus on not filling any more leases at this point.
Correct.
I don't think we have consensus.
That wasn't my consensus. My consensus was to leave it full, but, and I said so at the airport commission. Just because of but to do something, we have to get something done over the next 5 years. That was my comment at the airport commission.
Why would we bring somebody in and if in 5 years or even 7, we're going to have to pay relocation for them?
But in 5, there's no guarantee in 5 years you're going to take that building down. I mean, what if it lasts 20 years? What if it? I mean, even, and who was it,
When the
Don Ship
Powerball,
that
I
said?
mean, in reality, we know this building is not going to last 20 more years. I mean,
Well, how old were those ones that you took down?
Oh, they were old. They were really old.
This was
Yeah.
built in the late, from a useful life perspective, this was built in the late 60s, and
The ones prior to that were built
earlier than
into
that.
in the 50s.
I'm just saying, like, as we look at, if you look at depreciating a building like this out, for example, this would have, gone through its depreciation cycle, and I think anything you're getting from it here on forward is a bonus,
so where are we at with filling another vacancy or not? I know we're not voting tonight, but where are people at? I heard Sam. I think I heard Ed.
Yeah, I would not like to see the vacancy filled in there. The relocation costs are excessive. I mean, if there was a way we could get around that part of the contract, but there just isn't. We can't, even if a month-by-month lease, we're still on the hook for thousands of dollars. I mean, it is ridiculous how much it costs to relocate the other hangars at the time, and yeah, it's just going to go up. So I don't see where it makes any sense to put somebody in there now.
What was total relocation cost when you did the last round of airport relocations? Just somebody off the top.
if I remember right, our budget with MnDOT was like $65,000, but I'd have to really go back and double check that.
And how many were relocated?
And for how many hangars was that?
It was about a dozen, I think.
Yeah.
So $5,000-$6,000 a piece.
The expenses with the paperwork. I mean, it's criminal what's going on
Didn't
there.
go to the relocation.
No, it didn't go to the people that were
Aaron,
relocating.
Right.
I'm still a little in the fog on, if you have a month-to-month or a year and that lease expires and you don't renew, why we have to pay relocation.
Thank you for asking that.
I just don't understand that at all, and could the city attorney explain that to us?
Yeah,
What's the purpose of a
Is this
lease?
some avionics law?
Yeah, we're happy to forward, or, Bridget, if this item hits the agenda next week, Bridget would be here to certainly provide feedback on that. But there was a case with the University of Minnesota that basically overlaid onto local government the requirement in the event that you're in a lease situation and they're displaced involuntarily, that the uniform
That's
relocation.
if it's leased, but if you're not renewing the lease, it's not leased.
Yeah, but we're leased month to month, and so, to the extent that we go to terminate that lease because we are moving out of the facility and creating a displacement, the Uniform Relocation Act applies, and so it's a tough one. I'd rather it didn't, of course. It seems like it's a stretch, but that is where things have come down, and that is the advice we've been given on this one. And
So essentially, once you're in the rental business, you're forever in the rental business until
you can't
you
get out.
pay to relocate your tenants.
it's a disincentive to rent.
That's why the city should
So
be in the rental business.
without that being on the table, I would have said, well, let's fill it up. Let's give somebody that use of that space. But with that, the math doesn't work.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense to collect that 100 and something
Right,
a month.
right,
You could never pay that relocation off in 8 years.
right.
Well, and the city still has needs for cold storage too, and public works and that we can utilize some of that space.
I just did the quick math on my phone. $125 times 12 for 5 years is $7,500. We could easily spend that,
Go
or
on.
close to that, on just a relocation of somebody. That's why I'm saying, let's not fill that spot.
And any others that,
And any others that
open
come,
up.
and I agree, we need to try to figure out what we're doing in the future, sooner rather than later.
And we're not able to amend the lease since it's month to month to add something around a relocation fee or some sort of an offset charge to,
I mean, you could, you have 100% discretion, and we'll talk about that in the fee schedule later, to adjust rent if you wanted to, do that. But you'll get to hear about that as well. So, I mean, but
Yeah,
this
I'd
have
is
challenges in that area.
this rental rate we have established is basically, you have 100% discretion on this particular rental rate. It's not tied to an existing ground lease or
Right.
any language that governs the adjustment of, other than, what does the market say about that?
My suggestion, don't fill it until we have a longer term strategy on what is our rental solution out there.
yep.
It's an unfortunate law.
All right. So we should go back to item number 4 then?
So Mayor Members Council, Caleb, I think, who's here, he had requested the opportunity to be on the agenda this evening just to have a conversation with you about the development at 190th. All we did from a staff perspective was include the materials that were in your packet, the resolution of denial for the project. Just from a transparency perspective, we did notify our previous notification list, albeit maybe a little unsuccessfully because we said 7 instead of 6:30, but it all worked out in the wash here because it's 7:30 now. But we did notify people just so people are aware of what's going on and the conversation that's being had here. So I guess with that, I'd probably defer to the council and or Caleb to address you on that.
Mr. Mayor, weren't we kind of thinking about reopening the open forum, being there was kind of a misprint on that?
Yeah, we can reopen the open forum unless, I don't know if people want to comment before Caleb or after you, or?
After would be preferable. We'd like to find out why he's here.
All right, sounds good, Caleb, if you want to start.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I actually have some handouts. I didn't get a chance to print out everything, so I'm going to be walking through. I'll just go through it and try and
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, man.
Just an outline, kind of walking through how we got to where we got to today. So, just do a quick summary of where we started, how we got to where we are. So I'll briefly run through it. Just talks about. Oh, go ahead.
I was just to say, it's kind of, this was the whole idea, is that there's been so much information, disinformation, misinformation. So we sat down and Caleb put together, this is the shortest timeline, quick to, they think, but quick and to the point and factual.
Yep, so for those that don't have it, and you guys can follow along, it just starts out that I borrowed the money from my dad's company to purchase this land at which I wanted to build one house for myself. We are not land developers by any means. My dad's company is just a carpenter remodel company. He's a general contractor. I think that's been blown way out of proportion, especially to our neighbors who think somehow we've snuck in here and tried to do some deal underneath their nose of being some big land developer and pulled some trickery of some sort on them. There's a picture of a before and after on one of the recent rehabs we just did down in northeast Minneapolis. I bought this property. I was hoping at the time when I looked at it, there's 15, well, when I bought it, it was 13 acres before the land swap with the golf course or the lot line adjustment, which now brings it to above 15 acres. The original plan was looking at a lot of the properties along 190th that I'd be able to split it. That a lot of them have the 5 acres or less. I would have enough frontage that would qualify the frontage and the square footage amount.
Caleb, hold up a second. Hang on.
Oh,
You can't hear back
Hello?
there?
Hello?
I don't think it's on.
Yeah, it's on.
Check the audio, babe.
Is it? Hello?
I don't think it's on.
Yeah, speak into the mic as best you can, though.
Okay.
If you want to put your presentation on, because we have a camera that'll actually put it on the screen from here.
Oh, okay.
Drop it right on the, there, at least I'll give some of an overview.
Yeah.
Caleb, why don't you test the microphone there, just.
Hello?
Oh,
Quite a bit better, huh? Start all the way from the beginning. Mayor, member of the council, we'll try this again. So like I said, from the very beginning, I bought this property from, or I found this property on the side of the golf course. The land, it was 13 some acres at the time. I bought it with the intentions of building my house on it and moving my family up to Forest Lake. And when we bought it, just to clarify some facts here, is we are not a land developing company. We are not land developers by any means. The biggest subdivision we've ever done is a lot split. So I mean, this is completely new ground to all of us. So when I bought it, my plan was to split the property. And the reason I wanted to split the property was based on the fact that everyone along 190th, or a good chunk of people along 190th, okay. There's a lot of, it would be people to the east of me on 190th have less than the recommended or the required amount. They're all non-conforming lots. They're all under 20 acres. Some are less than even 5. Being that I had 13 and with the land swap to the golf course would put me over 15, I thought with the frontage that I would have to 190th and the square footage I would have for the lots, that splitting it would be a very high possibility. And if I could split it, we would do exactly what we've created down in Maplewood on 61 and Parkway, which is where I bought a lot from my, or bought a existing house from my dad that we had fixed up, split the lot, and then built a house next door. So now my parents live 16 feet away from me. And I was hoping when we recreated it, he'd be a lot further than 16 feet away. A little more elbow room from mom and dad, which would be nice. Thanks. So then on October 2nd, we had the fire department come out and burn the property. And during the time that we burned the property, there was a lot of discussion about things that you could do on this property. And we talked about the lot split, and a lot of people were telling us that, well, it's 20 acres, and The sewer line actually got brought up, which is the main sewer line that feeds out of Forest Lake down through Hugo, and that is on the property. And a lot of people talked about how you could probably build more houses along the golf course, which would be a better use of the land than just having it all sit in the back. And yeah, during that time, we actually thought that was a negative, because we thought, oh no, there's a sewer underneath here. That's why no one's built a ton of houses on it. We're not going to be able to build even our house on it. You know, again, not land developers. We don't know what that means. So we were very confused on what that would entail. So when we started doing some discussion, talking around, one of the developers told me to talk to the Met Council, reach out to them and see what they say. So we started down that path, which then started leading us towards the path that we went on.
Just read it.
That's fine. I called the Met Council engineers, Dan and Tim, and they told me 99% of the requests are denied. However, they told me this is such a unique property and the way that it's located, it would work. They said to call the city and start to work with them. They said that there is times where they do private hookups, but the best way to go and the best route would be to go directly through the city and make it work so it would fit in with the future plan for the city. When I met with Donovan to discuss this, he said that there were, although he had a lot of reservations up front because of the planning side of it, with the new comp plan coming out and everything else, he said this is such a unique situation that there is merit. On March 14th, I received a letter from Ryan, and he talked about the conditions of the property, which is attached to the back, things that we would have to do in order to make this development work. On the 22nd, we went to a planning commission meeting with a concept phase. And at the Planning Commission meeting, the words were, we like the entrepreneurship, we like the unique situation, or this is a unique situation and we like the entrepreneurship and we'd like to see how we could get this done. So a lot of encouragement. Then went to the City Council with the same plan of the concept phase, and seemed to all be in high praise, and again, seemed to be encouraging of the project. Then we kind of hit a snag. Yep. April, May, June, July, August, September, there was a lot of new information brought up, false information from our aspect. There was tabled votes. There was a subcommittee meeting with 2 of the members that were supposed to be on it, didn't even show up to it. We had people deciding whether or not it was a 15-acre parcel or 184-acre amendment plan. There were talk of $1 million homes being built in this with a gated community. And then there was the $8 million cost that got brought up that was somehow going to be split to all the neighbors, the well moratorium that wouldn't allow us to do the wells, the contamination to the aquifer, that it's not our turn to develop this land, and then even the idea of moving the golf course to the other side of 61 was brought up. So a lot of information that got brought up and snowballed into a ton of false stuff that I think got brought into the decision-making process. Finally, after 6 months of trying to figure all of this out, we were told by the Planning Commission to go to the City Council workshop because they needed direction from you guys on what to do. And so we brought it to you guys. And at that meeting on the 18th of September, we were told that you guys didn't understand, if I remember correctly, why it took so long to get even to this point, that we have a 5-0 vote, and that we want to see this go to the Met Council. On October 9th, the City Council meeting, we ended up having a vote of 3-2 against the project. So tonight, I'm here to discuss why did all of a sudden in 3 weeks the tide turn from 5-0 vote to 3-2.
I never said that. It was never a 5-0 vote.
No, we didn't say you said it.
I'm sorry?
We never said you said it. It was told, it was said to us. It was at a, I'm sorry.
I never said anything about it. We're trying to get the facts.
Sure.
And so, to say that there was some kind of a slam dunk on a 5-0 vote, that's just not the case. The other thing is that when you ask about what happened for the term, one of the reasons I voted against it was because there was a lot more information that came about through the Planning Commission. That's their job, to come up with all these different findings of fact. And they worked on it for a long, long time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where it ended for me.
Okay.
I guess,
So I guess we can start with you, Sam. We'll just go right down your list of what you said. So you said the Planning Commission did a thorough job on this, or that what you just said, your rationale for your vote was that the Planning Commission found a lot of facts that they brought up. But during that list of all the facts that they brought up, I just said a lot of those were actually false. There's not an $8 million cost to the city.
Yeah, I wasn't privy to the exact conversation that took place at the Planning Commission.
Okay.
But, that's, and I don't know how much of this stuff they bought when they were looking at that thing. They certainly would have given that a lot more thought than just those numbers, And so,
You would think.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's 7 members,
But I
7
know,
or 8
but
7 or 8 members.
They voted for this by a show of hands. Then they voted against it the same 5 minutes later.
I
And it
think
was
you're,
even quoted that night, Sam, just to show you the lack of preparation from the planning commission, that the reason they can't vote for it for a few of the people was they can't put 18 wells in this area because there's a well moratorium in the area, which, Ryan, is there a well moratorium in the area? As of right now?
Moratorium is on the Mount Simon Aquifer.
Yep.
Which is where the 3 existing city wells are located to supply water supply to the city distribution system.
So would these wells for this community go into that aquifer?
You would not be allowed to put them into
Yep.
Mount Simon.
So again, when they say they can't vote for this because there wouldn't be 18 wells, because it wouldn't exist, you couldn't do it, that's not true. We could do it as long as we didn't go into that aquifer, correct?
Approved by the DNR.
Yep, which Dave said already doesn't raise any concern to the DNR at all, because 18 wells doesn't even hit their radar for the amount of water that would be coming out. So I'm just saying, I'm just trying to say that if that's your rationale for the planning commission, there's plenty of reasons why the planning commission brought up a lot of different stuff that came up that had nothing to do with this, and actually could have been done during the preliminary plat phase, not necessarily during this vote.
I think you're missing 2 key elements. So preparation for this meeting, I went back to watch that planning commission meeting because I wanted to refresh again what was their conversation. And I think you're picking parts of their conversation, and then clearly there was some confusion over the well ordinance and whether there was a prohibition in place and what that meant for your property. But there was a lot of conversation also around the sequencing of development and where the city is prepared to support development and where they're not. And that's where I think that you're choosing to exclude that from your reason, and that was one of the reasons that I came back to when I made the vote that I made. Also, in the timeline of what's changed, there's been a lot of conversation, and I've gotten an education around. There was a lot of benefit or a lot of momentum on this council, and I won't speak for the whole council, but for myself, of sure, we'll let you go to Met Council, go to Met Council. Well, as I've matured in my understanding, Met Council's likely to say yes. And I felt like I was doing you a significant disservice to say, yes, go to the Met Council if they were to approve it, and I'm going to come back and have concerns. And, I told you early in this project, if this is going to be successful, you need to rally some more support you don't have today, specifically around neighbors and specifically around the Planning Commission. And so, again, preparing for this conversation, I went back to watch that Planning Commission meeting, and they have some real concerns that are legitimate concerns that are still unanswered. And I think that's part of what drove them to, it wasn't a close vote, it was, I believe, a 6-1 vote. Again, there's 2 questions. Would I support you going to Met Council and getting approval? Yeah. However, I felt like that's also doing you a disservice because I have some long-term concerns and I'm still not seeing those addressed. And so I feel like, that's doing you some injustice, and, I would hate for you to go through that effort to just come back if we have these other concerns that aren't being addressed. So again, I think it's Planning Commission. I think it's not necessarily I can't speak for them. It's not necessarily is this a great project or is this not a great project? I still think it's a great project. I still think there's some significant sequencing conversations and hurdles that need to be overcome and pushed to a vote. I'm not in a position where I'm ready to say, yes, green light, go.
That adds to more of the confusion. So you're for the project, but you're afraid it might cost.
That's a real reason to not do a project.
No, there is no cost to the city.
Okay.
That's what makes it unique.
Quality of project. So I'm concerned of the quality of the project without some substantial city investment to make it the project that it deserves to be. I think if that project is going to be successful, it's going to, in an ideal world, have city water. I also think it's going to have a reconstruct of 190th. Something else that's happened from the initial conversation until the decision was we've had a significant conversation on gravel roads and needs and inventory in the city of gravel roads and those costs. And as I look at that and I look at what the needs are on 190th and where you are in the prioritization, again, your project is ahead of where the city is able to support, I think, realistically right now. And again, that's back to why I made the vote I made.
Still confused. You say that you're, again, if there was no cost to the city, you would still be for it, but kind of against it.
Yes.
Is that what she just said? She's for it, but we're kind of against it.
Yes.
I don't know what that means. That's how, now, I'm still confused. I'm for it, but kind of against it. I'm for it, but I vote against it. Well, what? Maybe you can.
Again, I think the city is not doing, we are not doing our job if we allow a project to go forward if we don't think it's going to be a high-quality project. And I think a significant missing feature to your project as currently presented is a paved 190th. If I am buying a home in that development, I have an expectation that 190th is going to be paved, and I can't in good standing right now.
When is the 190th going to be paved in your mind? Just out of curiosity from a planning standpoint.
We currently have it on a
10 years.
190 is not in the CIP, just as this is so close to the development area. All the infrastructure that you've seen built to the north has been paid by the developers with the expansion.
Except for the headwaters?
That was just completed with a large grant. Developer historically paid fees and state aid funds. And well, you see the turmoil that we dealt with all summer of one way in, one way out through that intersection. So we got lucky there with the grant of $750,000 that we obtained.
Well, and Ryan, even if this project were to go, we would be escrowing money for those areas, right?
So within their approval letter, we did state that we would require an escrow fund of their portion of 190th. So that would kind of sit in a fund to the side.
Approximately how much?
There was a requirement from whether the planning commission or council to do even an interim basis a shape and pave, just because you know if you bring houses, you're obviously going to have more traffic, more trips per day, whether it's school buses, mail delivery, garbage trucks. So your dust component's going to be an issue on 190th if it's still gravel, and then more blading by Public Works. So that would be more detailed conversations you would get into on requirements within the development agreement.
Okay.
Can I ask one quick question along those lines? When does a gravel road get paved? There's got to be some kind of a trigger mechanism other than just garbage trucks and cars. There's got to be some account of some type.
There's some rules of thumbs to follow, certainly. In Forest Lake, traditionally, how gravel roads have gotten paved by the public or their adjacent property owners is a petition, because our assessment policy on taking a gravel road to an improved road is 100% assessed to the project cost. Oftentimes, we've gone through open houses and public discussion on what those costs might be to the adjacent property owners on an inquiry basis, and a lot of those projects have then gone away because the assessments are much higher than the residents wanted to participate in. So in reality, the gravel roads that have been converted to improved projects have been developer projects.
Okay. So 190th from 61 to our place, we have to pay for that as a developer?
Those types of details are all things that are negotiated in
well, you just said that typically the developer pays for it. That's just asking. So I pay for 190th from 61 to my place, but not from my place to Fenway or further down, further west.
Lots of times we deal with the adjacent property that you were developing, right? But we haven't had the situation where density at this rate out with gravel roads both west and east have not been improved.
Okay, but it's consumer driven. It's by the homeowners so it's not the number of cars, it's not the number of trips, it's not the number of trash trucks that you just talked about. That doesn't determine when a road gets asphalt. It's by the neighbors. The neighbors determine it. The owners of the properties along that road determine when a road like 190th, when it would be. In other words, correct me if I'm wrong, well, Craig.
In 2000, when Tanner's Brook was built, the township, I had this conversation with Aaron, the township forced us to pay for, at the time it was millings, wasn't it, Aaron?
Correct.
We paid for the millings in 2000, and then this summer got ripped up and put to gravel. But we paid for it. That was part of it. From 61 to, pretty much to Dan's property there.
So that's good. So that was in 2000, so it
It
was
was
17.
99 or 2000.
Yeah, so 17 plus years ago. It was better 17 years ago than it is today, is what you're saying.
Well,
now they just ripped it
better
out.
this spring.
Better this spring.
Yeah.
Before you started off and turned it into a mud pit.
But yeah, we had to pay for that, so I don't know why it got tore up.
Okay. Anything in there from, you just mentioned the township, so I didn't know that this was part of the township, Forest Lake
It was
Township?
at the time.
At the time? So at some point it gets brought into the city, I guess?
2000.
What year was it?
2000?
Was it? Okay. Well, it must have been 99.
Yeah, because you guys were 99.
Okay.
Township, 2000.
And at that time, it wasn't talked about, must have been talked about as far as asphalt at that time. That's, again, I don't want to go down that. That goes another one of those rabbit holes we start going down. It doesn't really pertain to our project, other than I know that is a concern. And again, Mara, you just mentioned that that's a concern. But again, that's only an anticipated concern. It's not really a cost. Because from what you just said and from what I understand, and again, correct me if I'm wrong because I get confused. I'm getting older and I get confused a lot faster than I used to. But if I understand this right, the road 190th can't be asphalt over unless the neighbors are willing to pay for it. Am I incorrect or correct? Did I understand that right?
Currently, that's city policy is we have to have request to pave the road. Council can choose to pave it on their own, but typically, I don't think we ever have. It's always property owner request to get a road paved.
Okay, but then they're assessed, those property owners are then assessed 100% of the cost?
Correct.
Okay, so then Tamara's concerned that these people that are, whoever they are, Billy Bob and Susie, buy a house on this development, and they call you up, somebody up, and complain about the asphalt road, no asphalt, it's gravel, and you say to them, as long as you're willing to pay for it, we'll put it. So there's no cost to the city, if I've got that right. So now you're back for this project because you were worried before. See how the confusion gets in? You're for the project, but you're worried about the cost, but then we just find out the costs aren't there because it's going to be, if Dan wants this, if he wants the asphalt to his house, he's going to have to pay for it. I'm going to have to pay for it. As a developer, we're going to probably end up paying part of it because I'm assuming, I don't know if the fellows' names are here, but they're all on 190th. And I'd be willing to bet that if you got the asphalt road for free, you'd take it, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're gonna pay for it.
But
Yep.
that wouldn't be the case.
The confusing part is,
Yep, I didn't say that I would do it, I just said if we could. So the gravel road is a concern now, right?
So who
And
pays?
you're concerned about it, I got it. I think I've got this thing. So again, that's where the confusion comes into this whole thing. We're going from the assumption that it's a unique situation, there are no costs to the city. Actually it's a profit to the city because there's 18 homes. I did the math, but you go onto the website, the county website, and type in what the value of the house is, and you basically come up with over a 10-year period about a little over $750,000, almost $1 million over the next 10 years, as far as income to the city. Half of that's the cities, and half of that's the schools. So, in your property tax, that's just in 18 homes. And then if you develop a few other homes along the way, you know, it adds to the revenue, and I don't know why you wouldn't do those type of things. But anyway, so for it, but still against it because there might be some costs.
Let's move on from Mara. Let's keep going here.
My reason for, well, a couple ones, we had not a whole room full, but we had quite a few of the neighbors that currently live out there speaking against it. They weren't for the project. Their concerns were varied. Some of the concerns were dust, which we already kicked around here, amount of vehicle traffic. One of their main concerns is if water went in there, they'd be assessed. And that was
false.
I don't know if that's true or not true.
No, we're just got done saying it's false.
It's false.
You know, and then there was one of my concerns is, to me, you're still establishing a precedent for pocket zoning if you did that.
Can you define that for us?
Well, because you're
Honestly, this could honestly go on for a lot of the evening. You're not obligated to do this. You've done this in your resolution and your findings of fact. You certainly have the opportunity if you want to continue to engage in the conversation, but your resolution of denial states your basis for denial.
Well, that's
Again,
why, Aaron, let me say something. That's why we came here, A, to find out what it was, and B, is there anything we can do?
You can read.
We're basically at your mercy.
You can read the resolution. That was why it was denied.
Well, hang on, let me speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how this is spot zoning. I'd love to hear it, because it's not.
So, Mayor, Members of Council, the action that you had before you was a comprehensive plan amendment. I think a lot of the discussion focused around the idea that, and it went back and forth. It started off that the comprehensive plan amendment was not comprehensive enough. It included a pocket or an isolated, portion of 190th versus 190th in its totality. I would concede the fact that that area on 190th should be evaluated in conjunction with the comprehensive plan update. I think that's a fair point. I think it's a fair point to discuss the idea of when you create that boundary, you should probably pick up both sides of the road. I mean, as a planning practice, but that is what is within our comprehensive plan at that point. I think there's a lot of process that needs to go through in order to make that determination ultimately there. From a spot zoning perspective, right now, all of the parcels that are in and around that property, would retain the previous comprehensive plan designation, which is more rural in nature. This would create a pocket in and around that, is isolated. And so, I mean, the zoning here is isolated. Whether that's what the implications of that are, I guess, that must be discussed. But
isn't that the one thing that the Met Council is actually good at figuring out? Is what is spot zoning and what is not? The Met Council will never approve something that is a spot zoning thing.
I don't think that's a true statement. I think their concern is going to be around the use of public utilities, and there is a great argument here for this development because of where that sewer line runs. For that reason, I think they don't necessarily care what our zoning rules are. They wouldn't even require a planning commission approval. They want to know what the planning commission's position was, but they don't require an approval.
The Met Council, before they can even move forward, has to make a ruling. And if the Met Council feels that this is spot zoning, the Met Council would not give them the approval to move forward. That's what I'm trying to say. Do they actually make a decision on whether we consider it spot zoning or not? No, they don't. They'll make a decision on what big government decides is spot zoning or not. And that's the Met Council itself. They're not going to put us in a position to allow a spot zone to actually happen. This is a very unique thing. First of all, our MUSA line should have been defined much better on the comprehensive plan as far as what was happening on the other side of 190th. Why you stop in the middle of a road, I couldn't tell you, but hey, whatever. And so the fact that this is a unique situation, all they were trying to do is go to the Met Council to figure out, will they say yes or no? There was still plenty of time to have all the discussions to figure out, as you said, what's going to happen with the road, what's going to happen with water and anything else. So, to stop a project because we think there might be a problem, I think is just wrong. But I didn't vote against it. So, well,
and if we look at our upcoming comp plan, this is going to be in there. Those changes are going to be in there. It's not spot zoning. I mean, it's maybe a year ahead of where we're at with the comp plan, but it's going to be in there. I think one of the first conversations we had with this project was the fact that it's not going to cost anybody any money, any of the neighbors. That was talked about, and we were all, I think, on the same page at that time. It was your project, you were coming in and doing it, but it wasn't going to be costing neighbors money. So, I think those answers, those questions were answered to begin with. I think trying to get this out and clarify a lot of the confusion that is existing. I still want to open up open forum, so as soon as you guys are able to step away, then I can let some other people have some conversations as well.
I guess I just had one other question, and mostly for you, Ryan. The 190th is supposed to be a collector road, which is going to go to 3 lanes, correct? That's kind of the main plan now?
Yep.
So paving that road today wouldn't make any sense from an economical standpoint. If let's say the city council were to say, yeah, let's just pave it to make this work, you're going to be tearing it up to change it in the next 5, 10 years. Would that make sense? Would that be a safe assumption to say?
I guess
from that aspect?
Just to be open, before we start talking about paving 190th, we need to talk about the sanitary sewer extension that's identified in our comprehensive sewer plan, where we do show a connection at the Met Council line, I think, on the west side of the proposed development. We are proposing to run gravity pipe down 190th and well east of 61. There's portions around the 61 corridor where that pipe will be approximately 40 to 50 feet deep. That will, though, continue minimal grade all the way past Granada, east of 61, to eliminate any lift stations that would be needed to serve that area. So, with that and even talking about road work, there's a significant amount of sewer work that needs to occur in 190th to ultimately serve this region.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ryan, whose cost is that?
The developer pays for the extension of utilities. Any oversizing over depth is credited back towards the area charges that are incurred from the development. So in this case, if the developer were to extend sewer down 190th to serve the subdivision that we're talking about, he certainly would have some credits coming back towards the area charges to pay, back to what we require the developer to extend stuff. Because this would be considered trunk line extension. We have a whole policy and comprehensive plan and all that stuff.
Want us to step aside still?
Unless you have any other statements,
Well, the
I'd
only
like
thing would be
to.
is maybe to come back up during the open. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll let,
Okay.
We can.
Yep, we can get out of the way.
Since we're kind of off schedule here, we usually have open forum sign up, but why don't we have Henry come up first, and anybody else who'd like to speak after that, I'll just write your names down.
Council, thank you for waiting so that neighbors could get here on the confusion about when this item was going to be on the agenda. Clearly, the property owners are against any development. We collected a 22-party petition at the last meeting. I can sympathize with the owner of the property because they have a property they've bought and paid for. The idea of 2 lots is very acceptable to me, and I would think most of our neighbors. That it goes to high-density development for single-family housing is what we're not too excited about. Development will come to the area soon enough. I was also surprised, as I've inquired in the past, a lot of times when I've gone into areas like this and done development, there's a grand master plan on the utilities and the roads and the state aid roads that might be there. And we don't have any of that. So it's just lacking. From the standpoint of our property that we own, I can see my neighbors at some point in time, in joining into a development or having a developer take over several parcels and subdivide them. Pretty normal situation, but boy, the incentives aren't there right now. There's lots of empty lots in the city that have utilities. In the market, if you look, you got an excess supply from the standpoint of vacant lots. So it's not a prime time for us to develop our properties. We would be hard pressed to compete against the finished lots. Anyway, the situation with, in my sense of it, is that the Smiths they own some property, and if they wanted to split it into 2 lots, I would certainly endorse that. And those would be two nice, fine lots that would have a good value, rather than developing the property into 14 or 15 lots. Thank you.
Would anybody, Mr. Taylor?
Dan Taylor, 18980 Fenway. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity here. I think one of the things that were missed in this conversation from Caleb and his father here is that when we were at these planning commission meetings, they were very vocal. They were talked about. The planning committee asked the questions. They asked and asked and asked. And at the end of the day, they decided that this is our one time to vote on what we think should happen in this area. And that's what they said. And they voted 7-1 to go that direction. And as I see this, I mean, I voiced it all through the planning committee. I was there. All of our neighbors were there. And the miscommunication that is presented here earlier is, I don't see it that way. I think it was really well discussed. It is my question to you, though, is if 190th was paved, that would have been assessed to the property owners, right? Is that a legitimate, is that a correct assumption on my part?
Not at the moment, no.
If 190th was paved, it would either be paved through a bonded issue, right?
Well, there's many different forms. Typically, right now, if the property owners want a road paved, yes, then it's typically split up.
So Henry, my question here is, if it was paved from the 61 to the property, Henry Votel would be assessed. Is that a correct statement?
Well, I guess it really depends. I think the answer to the way you're phrasing it is probably yes, but there's also the developer who's able to pay for it in some instance. So is it likely that people would be assessed? Most likely, yes. But is it 100%? No, it's not.
Their portion would be assessed.
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Well, it's one of the things that keep coming up. In the past, I mean, this has been the history of Forest Lake is to pass it on to the local adjacent landowners.
Agreed.
Right.
Okay. I think, and I'm only going on a history. I mean, granted, this could be different in the future, and just like all the things could be different in this project. And the other part that I'd like to talk about just a little bit is exactly what Ryan just talked about here, is that, you know, if we paved it and 5 years from now we do a bigger development because we've got to tear it all up and redo it, it's really poor planning. And I think that this is what came back from the Planning Commission, is this is poor planning on a big project. This is a small project that should be a part of a big project. And I don't think there's a neighbor in the neighborhood that would fight a big project, a bigger project that entailed. And then we come back to the very beginning. This was this is right or wrong, Mike, right or wrong. The 190th was the cutoff line.
Yep.
And hey, I'm moving south to be in an agricultural area.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm playing by the rules, and now you're telling me that the rules are changing, or could change. And if we go through the comprehensive plan and we change the rules, I'm on board. I'm really on board. I don't think there's anybody here that would be, but we're changing the rules prior to the comp plan change. And that is what I think the stickler was on this whole, from the get-go, so.
100%.
What was that, Tom?
So I thank you. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Just come on up and state your name and address for the record, please.
It's Mark Lindberg. I live at 8719 North Shore Trail. I'm just here to support the Smiths, friends and a customer of mine for 20 years. And as a taxpayer in Forest Lake, and a businessman, I'm always for development to a point. I don't know all the details of this project, but golfed at Tanner's Brook many times and looks like a great place to live. So I would live there. So the thing that kind of bothers me is I'm kind of seeing, I'm an electrical contractor, used to work for a lot of small builders. I'm kind of lending itself to the death of the small builder. I can see I see a lot of what's going on here with the big corporate builders out of California. And I can see a big payday for all these landowners here in the next few years when these guys come in and with all the money in the world to develop this. And it seems like Forest Lake pretty much does whatever they like the big deals. Don't seem to like the small deals. So that's just my opinion from what I see. But, I guess that's all I have to say. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anyone else in the audience that? Come on up. Oh.
Dan Pelican, 5611 190th Street. You know, this whole thing that I've been going, all these planning commission meetings, these meetings and such, you know, I just want to bring back to the basis that you know what you bought, you knew what the plan was, how many houses you could build on that property. You hurried up and burned down the old one. You haven't cleaned anything up that was burnt down. It's still a ruin all around me. And I'm the neighbor, okay? If, in my opinion, if you wanted the integrity of the neighborhood and stuff, you would mow the lawn, clean up all the trash that's laying everywhere, and stick to plan that it's agricultural, it's a 20-acre minimum. You were allowed when you bought it, you knew it, one resident house for that property, and be a good neighbor. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Well, I'll start.
You start?
I guess I'm in 100% agreement with Dan Taylor. That was kind of the whole point of when we keep bringing up this road of it didn't make any sense to us from this aspect of being such a small project, and that in the future it's going to be turned into a bigger road, that paving it wouldn't make any sense. And dealing with the millings or whatever that's going to go in the spring, right? The millings are going back in the spring?
Is that the same that's on the east side of 190th on the east side? Because that's not pavement on that side, and it's not gravel. I don't know what that is.
So, Mayor, members of council, we, you know, as accurately stated by Craig before, they were required when Tanner's Brook came forward. There was a discussion on whether to require them to pave at the time, given the activity that the golf course would generate, or ultimately what happened is they required them to place millings, and it was kind of back and forth. The original approvals, I believe, had a condition that required paving. Based on golf course and local traffic, we get a lot of requests for a better condition at 190th, even when the previous millings were applied. If those got a little, if they got bumpy or whatever, we would hear about it. And it got to a point where the condition, millings are not designed to last forever. The council understands we get lots of requests for millings because they are a good interim solution, emphasis on the interim. And they're not designed to be a street. They're just designed as an interim application for when we have those materials. Certainly, the fact that they lasted since 2000, 1999, whatever the case was, in this case, is pretty impressive. Generally speaking, when one would not expect that to be the case. So we had to reclaim those this year. We were spending too much of our paving budget, patching budget to patch millings. That's not what our patching budget is really designed for, is to be patching city streets. And so we did reclaim that this year. We are looking to apply millings next year. If we receive millings off a mill and overlay project, the intention would be to put that there. But again, a very interim condition, not long term. I think where the sentiment on the road comes into the equation is we already have a condition where people would prefer a paved condition there, absent some large city investment or private investment. That's not projected to happen. It's not in any plan right now. And so I think the thought process is why exacerbate that problem? You can talk about whether that would or wouldn't, do you assess in the future or not? Definitely the idea is some share of that will be paid by this development, at least their proportionate share. As far as what's happening across the street, was that millings or was that double chip seal application that we?
Double chip seal, yeah.
Okay, so slightly different application across the street. It's like a seal coat, but put down twice, a little more robust, and it's something we're kind of experimenting with to see, the longevity on that and how that works out. So
experimented west of 190.
165.
Still adds to the confusion. Again, I think obviously we're here looking for a not direction, clarification. We still are confused of where we were led for, I feel like, thank goodness nobody's name was Moses, because we were wandering in the wilderness for that 6 months, trying to get to this point and then get to that vote. So we're asking for, tonight obviously we asked for some clarity. It doesn't sound, we still have more confusion again on this whole thing than we do clarity. And we're asking, basically, is there anything we can do to come back? And what do we have to do, I guess? What do we have to do on this project? What is it that we need to do to finish this up? That's what we're asking. I think we've, again, confusion.
Go ahead, Mara.
In my opinion, every piece needs to hang together. And I need to understand what the water plan is, the sewer plan, long-term interim plan for 190th, long-term plan for 190th. And the fact that those conversations are challenging is because whether you call it spot zoning or jumping ahead of the development curve or whatever you want to call it, that is the situation that you're in. And so I'm open to continuing those conversations. I'm open to hearing more, but you need to bring, in my opinion, neighbors along with you, and the planning commission needs to come along with you. And if this is gonna be successful, it's gonna require those parties to also be at the table. And we need, so those, who is paying for, let's be clear on who is paying for those paving projects and what those costs are. I need to understand those. Push to a vote as we were. I wasn't prepared to support the project long-term, again, which is why I'm not going to send you to Met Council if I think Met Council might approve it. I'm going to come back and say I still have concerns. So, just speaking from my own opinion.
Sam or Ed, anything else?
No, I mean, nothing that has been said has anything to change my mind as far as what I feel. And I know that you mean well, you're going to do a good project, but you're going to be selling $550,000 homes, And if you put 18 of them in there and there's no road, then instead of you standing there, we're going to have the owners of those homes saying, when am I getting my road?
But
And it's not going to happen.
But we just discussed that. They have to pay for it. So it's not, again, the concerns, that's where I get confused. Every time somebody brings up a concern about a cost.
There's other people along that
It's not on
road.
the city.
Hold on a
There's other
second.
people along that road would also have to pay for it, right?
Well, they get a benefit.
They don't want it. They were
Yeah, they do.
standing here saying they don't want
They
it.
don't want a dusty, dirty road.
They had a benefit till they ground it up.
Right. So that's what we're saying. They're all here to complain about the crappy road right now. It's in terrible condition. So
Maybe you're hearing something different than I am. I'm hearing them that
is that correct?
they were
You guys are
not,
happy
they
with
were
the
not
road
here
condition?
complaining about a road. They were here saying they're not in favor of the project.
Wait, I know what the road is a
Okay,
separate issue. I
okay,
got
hold
that.
on, hold
Okay.
on.
I'm
Okay.
confused.
Stop.
Okay.
Sam, anything else?
No, I said my opinion on it, and the road is an issue, but it's going to increase traffic tremendously back on into a rural area. And I think the planning commission covered that. That's just my opinion.
I know. When you, can I
Gentlemen.
say one more thing? When you say a rural area, we walked it. I can walk from that house, that driveway. I can walk to the, is it Leland School, which is at the head, Leela, in less than 20 minutes. It's closer to that school than you are right now to the high school. That's how, so when you say it's in the middle of nowhere, it's out in a rural area, I'm less than 20 minutes, I can walk to the Leland School.
Actually, I do have actually a legit question. Next year, or by the end of this year, we have the comp plan gets submitted, and it gets implemented by next year.
No, 2018 submitted. So we will have draft
By
and we will be.
By 2019, it should be implemented, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any way that we could do a rezoning application for the property and then have it contingent on the MUSA being moved or the new comp plan being moved? Would you guys be for something like that?
I think that's out of sequence.
Yeah. So,
No. According to Jay, when I talked to him, that would be in sequence because that's exactly what we were doing with this one. We would be making the zoning application contingent on the MUSA being adjusted, so it would be the same thing.
but that was already voted down. I don't disagree with you.
I know, I'm saying, but if we resubmitted it and went through it, would that be something you guys would be open to doing?
I'm listening to the 3 no votes from the previous project, and all 3 of them are still no's.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the next step in the process for you guys would be to look at the changes as part of the comp plan review and to go forward after that review is done. I completely disagree with the 3 no votes, but they're the ones who have dictated this is the way the council is going. So with that, unless anybody else has anything else to say, sorry.
No problem. Just flushed $1 million down the drain. I know, I'm just saying. It just
You're
flushed-
ignoring the costs. You're ignoring the
Don't
costs.
go there. Don't go there.
Understood.
Don't go there.
All right. Next item on the agenda is committee and commission review. Shh. Shh. Okay, please. Gentlemen, thank you. Next item on the agenda is committee and commission review and council liaison responsibilities.
Mayor, members of council, this is just an informational item here. Basically, in January, the mayor will make his recommendations on council liaison assignments, as well as there are some vacancies that will be projected on various city committees and commissions. At that time, I believe previously you'd wanted a discussion on what are the roles of the various committees and commissions. I tried to briefly outline those within the list. So if you're highlighted, minus Councilmember Eigner, and the Airport Commission here should also be highlighted. So I've neglected to not do that, or failed to do that. But I tried to let you know where the committee was originated out of. So in the case of the Airport Commission, for example, it's established in the city code, and its functions are outlined within the city code. The council role in this particular case is a voting role. So I tried to delineate voting versus non-voting, and that's strictly a function of how it's created in the code. And then the committee's relationship to the city council. In this case, this is an advisory committee to the city council, so they make recommendations to you. You know, again, I won't go through every one, but you have the benefit of that information for each item. So just as a contrast, the Cable Commission has a citizen representative and a council representative on it. That is actually a creature of a joint powers agreement between the cities of Columbus and Scandia. And so that particular board is created via that joint powers agreement. The council role is voting in that case. And then they have final approval on a number of items. The primary city responsibility here is to annually approve the budget. There's also some items too regarding capital purchases and things like that, but the primary role for the city is each community does approve the budget annually. So I won't go into any and all of these. I know the mayor did want to have a conversation about the Planning Commission. Currently we do have a situation on the Planning Commission where we have a 9-member commission. That, from a comparative perspective, is large for communities. It's a situation where when the City Planning Commission and the Township Planning Commission merged, there was an attempt to maintain, you know, some representation from both. And so a larger group was put in place as they went through the blending of comp plans and zoning ordinances and things like that. We do have some vacancy there. We also have some people that are going off. It would be in a situation where if you wanted to amend your ordinance, where you could have a 7-member commission as opposed to a 9-member commission. So I think from a policy perspective, that's something for you to consider and discuss this evening. Other than that, I'm just happy to answer any questions you have on these. Otherwise, I believe the mayor, you know, would probably appreciate your individual feedback on your liaison assignments and what you know, are looking for next year. So.
Now, the ones that are highlighted in yellow, those are the ones that are up for reappointment or whatever, as I'm seeing that. Is that correct?
That is correct. So in the next round of appointments, those would be ones that you would consider.
So those folks would have to reapply for their position, is that correct?
Yep. So typically what we'll do about this time of year is send an ask out to people if they're interested in being reappointed, and they'll indicate that. You probably will likely have some vacancy on the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission. There's a number of those folks, and maybe even some people that aren't highlighted that might be in a situation where they might be resigning. So we'll see on that one, but you currently do have some potential vacancy there.
EDA.
Should we start with the conversation on the Planning Commission?
Go ahead.
Pointed. So I've been impressed with the Planning Commission. I appreciate the depth of knowledge that they have. Yes, it's a large group, but I think it's a well-functioning large group. Unless we were unable to fill vacancies, if there was, you know, if that's just a larger group than what this community is able to support long-term, I guess I'll say it differently. If we are able to continue to support a 9-member planning commission, I am okay leaving it in its current state. If that is a larger field than what we're able to support, then that's a different conversation, and then we would consider perhaps pulling it back. But again, in its, you know, it's well led. I think they have great discussion. I don't have concern leaving it 9 as it is today.
Other feedback?
Well, when I first got on the council, I did question a number of people that were on the planning commission. I did, because it seemed like an overly large crowd, but they do seem to work pretty well together and can come to a consensus and that sort of thing. So I'm torn really about it, you know. Just sometimes the smaller commissions are a little bit more efficient, you know, but seems like it's working fine, so.
I would say that I'm not in favor of going down from 9. I think it's a very well-functioning commission. It's probably one of the commissions that has
more robust debate and comes to a better consensus than probably any of them, including probably this council. So I'm not necessarily in favor of going down, but with that said, if people are looking to resign and not coming back, the dynamic of it probably changes. I'm very concerned that we would replace 5 people potentially with and have the majority of the board turnover. So I think we also have to be very careful about something like that as well.
Agree entirely.
But I mean, for me, in the past, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now, they did have a problem with getting a quorum a couple of times, but for the most part, it's not been an issue.
Right.
Yeah, there was some issues when Mayor Johnson was in charge, and between the Planning Commission and the City Council, there was a meeting that happened, and ever since then, there's been no issues that I'm aware of, and that's not to put Mayor Johnson down, it just happens to be the way the votes went at that point. But I'm not in favor of changing something that's not broken.
Would it be appropriate for us to revisit this particular question based on what expected vacancies are? I mean, if there's an opportunity to, you know, if 3 of the 5 aren't interested in returning, then maybe we have a different conversation. I would be open to having that conversation then, but.
I think you've, I think you can do that a couple ways. One, I think if all the current, you know, members that are vacant, you know, right now you have an 8-member commission, and if the folks that are currently on are all interested in being reappointed, you could still, I think the question is, I don't think you have to necessarily, you know, be in a situation where one of those members is not reappointed. I think you could, though, say, we're just going to be a 9-member commission, but not appoint the 9th member. Yep. And then once we do have a vacancy where someone's not interested in being reappointed, we're interested in moving down to 7. So, I mean, you can make the policy decision to be going to 7, but then the implementation of that can be over some period of time when you're not displacing somebody.
Assuming there's not a pool of people wanting to apply for the 9th, I'm assuming that's a fact, right? We don't have a pool of people that want to apply for the 9th position that's open right now?
Well, I don't know that we've necessarily solicited applications, and we will once we get a sense of who's interested in reapplying, so we have a better sense of how many are open. But traditionally, the Planning Commission has generated interest, yes. And so from that perspective, I wouldn't say that particular commission has been one where we've had a challenge in finding people willing to serve. Some others might fit that profile, but not this particular one.
If I recall, when the last vacancy occurred, and I believe Eric Langness was the last one appointed, I think we had 4 or 5 people who had at least talked about it, and I think 2 or 3 actually put in for it. So,
wasn't Commissioner Black the last?
Oh, that's correct. You're right. You're right.
But,
sorry.
But point taken. So, okay.
Sorry about that. Others?
No, I'm kind of in favor of keeping it the way it is. One of the things I know when I was in the Planning Commission, and there were a lot of times the Planning Commission came up with their decision, and it was constantly being overturned by the council. That's not happening too much anymore. So
I would agree, and that was one of the reasons for having that meeting. And once everybody got on the same page, it seems to be functioning.
Because I know when I was in the Planning Commission, there were a lot of commissioners that, well, why do we have the commission if the council's always going to make the decision? And so I think they're functioning really well.
And I think it's important to say that one of the other things that happened is that more authority was given to the Planning Commission as well. And I think that demonstrates the value of the Planning Commission. And so having a well-functioning commission is extremely important. And if there's issues on that commission, I would be fully in favor of doing something different. But right now, I'm not seeing them unless other people are. Aaron, I'm not necessarily against your idea at all of looking at whether, you know, not filling the vacancy and going down to 7, but if people have other ideas, I'm fine with that, but otherwise, I'm perfectly fine at 9 as well. There's no issues with quorum or anything, so.
That's all I had, unless you have other specific questions on this particular item. Otherwise, you know, again, I think it's just connecting with Mayor Winnick on your interest from a liaison perspective.
Okay, I will connect with him. You want to talk about the EDA?
Yeah, I don't know enough about what basically makes people qualified to be on the EDA. Or is it just they submit and the mayor appoints?
So yeah, members of the council, that's correct. There's no specific qualification for the EDA other than it shall consist of 2 council members, and then the balance to be appointed, you know, generally, you know, members of the community. In the past, mayors have really looked at, you know, are you integrated with the business community? Are you connected with the, you know, like at the chamber, for example, or how engaged have you been in those types of roles? But other than that, there's no specific qualification. There are some EDAs that have members that are, we're going to have a representative of the manufacturing sector and of the retail sector, or very specific slots. But I think a lot of communities have gotten away from that just because you really are boxed in and trying to fill a spot as opposed to maybe finding the most talented person to fill that role. So, you know, really it's just someone that's interested in serving. And they do, like the Planning Commission, have final say on a number of items that they end up dealing with. Some communities, though, I'm sorry to belabor the point, some communities, it's not uncommon for just the city council to sit as the EDA. In that case, the EDA becomes more transactional. We're going to approve a TIF agreement. We're going to approve the latest development agreement or what have you. The idea of going away from a council-focused EDA is so you can have members of the business community be on it and have more of that targeted outreach and engagement in the business community, irrespective of who may be on the council at that time.
Are there residency requirements for that?
I believe
yes.
There are.
So we couldn't have a developer or somebody outside the community on it?
It's Forest Lake only.
That amazes me.
So one of the things that I would being on the council when Mayor Johnson made the recommendation to actually expand this EDA from 5 to 7, one of the primary reasons this building got built, which is perfectly fine, but there's nobody coming up other than you know, council people. So I think one of the discussions that should happen at some point in time is, in the future, do we want to go back down to a 5-member board, or do we want to stay at a 7-member? I'm fine either way, just something that it was only recently that it went to 7, so.
Mayor Winnick, in your absence, I did try to bring forward the Planning Commission a number discussion as well.
Yep. They filled me up into that one, so thank you.
I appreciate the diversity of thought on the EDA. If we are able to successfully fill a 7-member board, I will take all of those opinions I can get. Doesn't seem like there's quorum challenges. Seems like we've got a well-functioning EDA. I would leave it as is.
I think during the election, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I agree.
I would say that during the election, you weren't saying it was a well-functioning EDA, though, so that was one of the reasons I was saying that. I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm literally pointing out what was brought up multiple times, so.
When I say, so we could have a whole philosophical conversation on what their topics are and what their agenda is. I would save that for a different conversation, but I think the conversations they have for what's on their agenda, they're doing a nice job.
Thanks for the clarification.
I think when you get too many members on any of these boards, the problem becomes nobody feels they have a piece of it. You know, they're just a body that shows up, and their level of commitment to the board isn't always what we'd expect out of it. That's, I think, one issue I've seen come through.
And if attendance challenges or participation challenges are, then I think there should be a expectation of participation or conduct, and if somebody's not able to meet those for whatever reasons, then that's an individual conversation, but I wouldn't necessarily move the number. I think the question was, should we move the number of the board? And I wouldn't adjust the number of the board for that.
Can we go to the Human Rights Commission unless people have other? Jeffrey. Being a former member of this commission, I know how much of a challenge it was at that point in time to get enough people to show up. Mara's liaison, is that still an issue? Quorum issues.
I am not a member of the Human Rights Commission.
I think I'm actually,
I think that's incorrect.
That one then.
Or if I am, I have not attended a single meeting. I don't believe I am.
Okay.
No, I'm pretty sure I am, and I've attended a few of the meetings. But yeah, they're
I know they don't
really having trouble with, filling the positions. We have some members that'll be leaving, and the reality is what are they? What's their expectation? What are they really here to do? And I guess for us, the question will be is there a spot for them? Is this serving a good purpose for our community? Do we need it at this time? Or is it something that, needs to be put to rest for at the moment and brought back if there's a need later time?
I know when I was on there, it was much more, I'll say, transactional, if you will. Somebody would make a complaint, and I think for the 5 or 6 complaints while it was on, they were all against the police department. And when you actually looked into them, it was one example was a police officer was dealing with somebody by the lake. It was their brother came up and tried to get in between the cop and the other individual. The cop put him in cuffs, and that was a human rights violation. They did the right thing. They protect him, and they didn't arrest him. They let him go. So those were the types of things that were coming up, and I'm not saying that's still what's happening. And a lot of the other things had to do with the school district. But there's some things going on in the schools, if you look in the last year to year and a half, but for the most part, I don't see a lot of large-scale issues that they're addressing, and so maybe it's more of a refocusing of what does it actually need to do versus being so transactional.
Great question on what does it need to do. I guess in 2017, I'm uncomfortable saying that we don't need a Human Rights Commission. I think you do. I think the question is, what is it? And even if it is just to simply be the liaison to respond, then that's a function. We should talk about that. But I think it should continue to exist. Now, perhaps, maybe this is an area where we perhaps have too large of a commission if it's difficult to get attendance, and if there's an opportunity to scale it back, perhaps. But I would not want to be part of a council that said that the Human Rights Commission wasn't important.
How many communities our size have a commission like this?
That's a good question that I'm not really in a good position to answer. I don't know.
Where did it come from? Like, what was there a triggering event that created the Human Rights Commission, or what was the genesis of?
I think the commission's gone through some different iterations. I think there was originally some community concern around kind of like Hmong and how some Hmong children were integrating into the schools, and how they were being received and things like that. And that was a number of years ago. Honestly, our complaint level is real limited at this point. So from that perspective, the complaints that are being provided over our hotline and things along those lines are really they're not significant in number. The focus has really, in the last couple of years, been more on education and what are some opportunities to do outreach. I know they've participated in the Festival of Cultures. There's been a few speakers on human trafficking and things along those lines. But you know, it's trying to find those, you know, educational options and things like that make sense and that are within the purview of the commission. There's not a lot of, I think there's a lot of people in that space right now, if that's a fair way to say it. The school district has got a lot of things happening in this area. The YMCA has actually kind of stepped in and provided a lot of educational things in this area. I know they've asked a nice recent series on human trafficking, and they've got an equity focus on how they can bring people together to you know, discuss a lot of the things that the Human Rights Commission has been focused on. So I think that might be part of it too, is where's our fit. But generally, as Councilmember Freer indicated, the initial core focus was really how are we, you know, is there a mechanism to bring a concern? I'd say the vast majority of those that have come before the commission have revolved around a concern that is within the school. And so that was always a challenge of, is that our space or is that the school space to be in? So, Chief Peterson, you have an officer that you know, attempts to participate in the commission. Any feedback that you have at all?
Yeah, what she's told me about it, it's Officer Nancy Carlson, and she actually stated almost exactly what everyone else has stated up here. The difficulties of you know, keeping a quorum, involvement, and things like that. I was involved in the Human Rights Commission, you know, probably 10 years ago for quite a few years, and it was definitely more active back then. And so I haven't been to one of the meetings in quite some time, but there's definitely some challenges with it right now. And I think, you know, what you mentioned too, Aaron, is very relevant, that there's other, you know, mechanisms out there, the YMCA and the school, talking about these, you know, concerns and things like that, but we just haven't had any complaints brought to my attention through the Human Rights Commission in quite a few years, to be honest with you.
In some regard, this is like the Maytag repair guy, right, where a quiet day is a good day. So the fact that it exists and is open and is there, and it's a way people can reach out, maybe it's an opportunity to partner back with the YMCA and kind of look for feedback on, you know, how would the Human Rights Commission and the YMCA work together, and maybe opportunity to reset mission a little bit.
I would point out that right now we would have no members on the commission after March of 2018 if we didn't appoint anybody. So clearly, right. I think we have to do something, but I think we really should have a discussion on size of the commission. I think 3 is more than enough because they already have a challenge. You know, getting people together. I agree with Aaron. There's a lot of other venues as well. And go ahead.
The frequency, can we set the frequency, or does it have to by ordinance meet so many times?
No, we can set frequency. And I think, and this is going back, you know, 7 years when I was on there, or 8 years, I guess. It was more of a meeting of convenience when something came up. There wasn't necessarily ever really a plan on how often you would meet. I would say we probably met like 4 times in probably a 6 to 8 week period, and then after that we didn't meet for like 5 months, and then we met a couple of times, and so it's not like a regular monthly meeting. The monthly meetings were canceled 95% of the time. So it just really needs a real definition and focus from the council on what they wanted to do.
They do have a speaker coming up on the opioid epidemic, is that correct? So they're.
That's exactly what the types of things that they would be really good at helping with.
Yep. So that is coming up.
So.
Okay. You covered the parks, or?
No, we did not cover parks, trails, and lakes. I think it's a good commission.
I think it's one of our best. I think they work well together. The size of the commission there is not in question.
I don't think so either.
Agree.
Personnel committee, I think that is what it is, has to be.
Yeah.
And planning commission, you covered?
We covered planning commission, and I agreed to fill you in after the meeting.
Sounds good. Right, other city positions? That's all. YMCA board, yeah. Watershed district.
Your Honor, I just suggested that each of the council members connect with you on their liaison assignments as you
Correct, yeah.
prepare maybe in January to have those put forward for consideration.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll go ahead, Ed.
One thing I'd like to throw out there on some of the commissions, like especially like Park and Trails and maybe the Planning Commission. I know we have liaison in all those commissions, but it would be nice sometimes to have them have a rep that would come and speak to us, I think.
You know, we're on the exact same page. I think some of these bigger commissions, EDA, Parks, Planning Commission, to a certain extent, some of the things that happen at Parks, Trails, and Lakes, I think having the chair come speak, that did happen in the past, and that kind of was dropped. And I think for some of this stuff going on, it's a very good idea.
I think some of the stuff, my interpretation as a liaison with the Airport Commission is far different than if Sam came out here and he's a pilot and spoke to us.
Right.
Because, I mean, it's just different.
I think it helped when we were having some of the Fenway discussions, having people from the Parks, Trails, and Lakes who are turf experts be able to speak to. So I think I agree with you.
Okay.
I think we could, at least at a minimum, have them, each committee or commission present in front of the council annually. And I think in the past, what we had done there is just try to schedule them, or maybe the meeting was a little lighter or something like that, or at least whatever worked for the chair or something to come in and give the council an update on, their activities and what they're thinking about, and then, an opportunity for you to provide feedback as well. So we could certainly do that for folks. And some communities for, the Planning Commission, now ours, has final approval on a number of items, and some have kind of voluntarily done this, but some communities will just say, if you have a 9-person board, we'll assign you 1 month for a council meeting, and you go when you have an application to represent the Planning Commission's perspective. We're a little different because you're only processing so many of their items, so I don't know that that would be a good use of their time that way, but that's something else that's done on key issues, and I think you'll see that for certain committees and commissions, those naturally, gravitate toward that, but at least an annual or whatever frequency you prefer, but at least an annual check-in I think would be helpful.
You talked about the voting status on different commissions.
We did not cover voting status on any of them.
Okay.
It's just very variable. So what I did in this in the list is I just added on council member role, basically voting or non-voting, and they're very much a creature of how they're established, generally speaking. So in the case of the Airport Commission, for example, it's established that the council member, is a voting member of the commission, whereas in the case of Parks, Trails, and Lakes, it's definitely a non-voting liaison responsibility. And so a couple of these are creatures of joint powers agreements or other agreements, and those have voting roles. And so a lot of, generally speaking, the council member's role on these is outlined in whatever the origination documents that go back to each committee commission. So.
Would we be able to change that, or do we have to?
Yeah, each one would be different. So you can't necessarily say across the board, we're going to do that. So like in the case of Parks, Trails, and Lakes, you certainly could make the council member role a voting role. You might want to, you'd have to maybe reduce a member to keep an odd number there. But that would require an ordinance change. Airport Commission, you know, in the reverse, the Airport Commission, for example, if you wanted to make the council role non-voting, in that case, you would have to do an ordinance change making the council role non-voting. In the case of like the Joint Fire Board, for example, that's a creature of our agreement with Columbus, and so we would have to amend our agreement. So each one has a different path if you want to make that type of adjustment.
Leaving them the way they are.
Let's keep them the way they are. I know we had the issue with, you know, voting, non-voting on the, at the beginning of the year and questions on that. So thought it would be nice to keep them all the same, but I'm open either way as long as there's clarification on what it is. You know, I really think like the Parks, Lakes, and Trails that, you know, and the Planning Commission, it would be good to have voting, but if you're okay to leave them the way they are.
I think those are two very good commissions right now, and in order to do that, you would have to change something up. There is an open spot in the Planning Commission at this point, but I think part of the discussion earlier was that we thought it was functioning well. We're not having quorum issues. We don't have people issues with filling the roles. And so it would just be good to leave it the way it is. And sitting on the council doesn't mean you're an expert on planning and zoning, that's for sure. So,
sure. All right, sounds good. Any other input?
No, the only commission that I'm involved with is the Airport Commission. My other liaison assignments are committees that are completely separate from this body. So, you know, with the Watershed District and the school board. So, I don't.
They won't let you vote?
No, they don't. I'm not elected to the school board. So the point is, I mean, I don't have much input on. I haven't been attending these other meetings. As simple as that.
I know there was some discussion earlier in the year about the school district liaison, or should we have them to the other schools, or just a broader educational liaison. I think that was a policy discussion, given that we've got 2 charter high schools and, you know, some parochial elementary schools. But I guess that's a policy discussion for the council. Currently, the liaison responsibility is strictly with the school district 831, so you could broaden that out to be education generally, or you could discuss or decide if you want to just add additional liaison responsibilities to those other schools or non-public school. I don't know, however you'd want to think about it.
So the opportunity did come up at the beginning of the year for Leela. We decided not to make that a formal liaison position. I stay in touch with the director over there and their chair of their board periodically. We have, you know, conversations just like you would have conversations with any other constituent member. I don't feel like they need a official liaison. I will check back to double check. And I'm not aware that North Lakes has reached out looking for that, or St. Peter's. I recognize that, you know, the school district is a big time commitment for Councilmember Husnick. And so I guess I would be inclined to keep it as is. I feel like we've got other relationships with those other schools that can be funneled in as necessary.
Well, and I think, you know, as I look at it as, you know, the school district itself is a governmental unit.
Right.
And I think there needs to be some coordination between the city and the school district, but with the other private schools, I think, 95% of their interests are going to be dealing with the school district, not dealing with us. Why add an extra level of complication in there?
I would just add, if something were to change with like Leela or something like that, I think they would bring it forward, and I think we should entertain it at that point. But I tend to agree to leave it the way it is. I think Sam's got his hands full enough with the school district with all their construction. So,
Well, that school board, I mean, they're elected officials too, so those are the meetings you need to go to. So, unless things change, I'd still do my job there.
All right, sounds good. Aaron, do you want to take us on?
Mayor, members, council, the next item is the 2018 proposed tax levy and budget. Just wanted to have a check-in prior to the December 4th budget hearing that'll take place. Tax notices were distributed recently, so those have arrived for folks. So not a lot of change since the preliminary levy was adopted in September. The notable item is the fact that the Joint Fire Board elected not to implement the fire inspector position, but they did authorize $30,000 to get fire pre-plans completed to really set the table and framework for a future fire inspection program that would be considered in conjunction with next year's budget. So in light of that fact, we did adjust line items to put in the $30,000 that they suggested for pre-plans, and then we did retain the $32,350 that was included for the building component of the position. So if you recall, it was 60% fire, 40% building, given some of our activity we have there. We did retain the building portion within the budget, figuring if we continue to have a sustained level of activity, we may need to do a seasonal type of position or contract inspection or something like that. That would be something to fill the gap. Certainly, as you might have seen from the last quarterly report for building, volume is up, significantly with the storm, and we're trying to work our way through that. So, as well as a number of other projects. Excuse me. However, though, that did result in a net decrease of the levy of, just a small amount of about $21,000. But previously, our preliminary levy was set at 6.02%. With that adjustment, it brings us down to 5.8%. I did just receive the League of Minnesota Cities preliminary levies for all cities across the state. The average was 6.8%, so you are seeing that trend. Other than that, I don't have a lot to add that's new or different. These tables have been updated to show tax impact. You will notice this year, just to get you prepared for the December 4th hearing, you will notice that some people are actually seeing decreases in like the city levy portion, and then others are seeing fairly significant increases. So there is a shift that's happened within the tax base, particularly around Forest Lake, especially Third Lake. There are a number of significant adjustments that were made to reflect sales around there. A little bit around Clear Lake, but not as pronounced as Forest Lake was. Commercial's up slightly, but not significantly. Some of the more established neighborhoods in Forest Lake are actually pretty flat, and so they did see some decrease. Some of the more suburban neighborhoods, like I might live in by the high school, slight increase, something more in range, but less than 6%. So you take that with some of the shifts that have happened, you're going to see a mix of people in terms of how it's impacted them. Apartments up significantly. Multifamily, significant valuation adjustments. So how it's impacted the base is going to be a little bit different this year. So just be prepared for that as we go on to the hearing. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I just want to check in, see if this is in line with your expectations.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'm assuming the assessor will be prepared to speak to that as to why that happened, because that doesn't seem to make logical sense.
Mayor, members of the council, this is always the difficult situation. So people did receive those valuation notices, and we went through the Board of Adjustment and Appeals back in April. And so they had the opportunity to reconcile their values. This is really about the spending side of it. So it's really not so much about what happened with the values. That decision has to get put to next April if people are in disagreement with their value. It's just the effect of that change with their value has that shifting that does ultimately happen.
This is the first time they see all of the pieces come together, right? So
this is where they have the opportunity to see what that shift in value means.
Yep.
You know, and again, they're not aware that certain areas didn't go up as much as theirs, and that there's slight shifts. And but again, there's also some offset with new construction as well. So it's always interesting. So as those statements came out, and I looked at mine, I think it came Friday or sometime last week, I just start going around to different classes of property and pulling just samples. And it's interesting, especially Third Lake, where, you know, some people, you know, saw some fairly significant adjustments. However, on the upside, that means sales are in that range. It just happens that, if you recall, during the recession, the lake properties, their values went down considerably. From a fortune perspective, they've rebounded now. So
not to where they were.
I only meant that I knew the procedure, but we just need to make sure that they're ready to speak to it, because they'll be here on the 7th, I'm assuming, correct?
The hearing's on the 4th.
I'm sorry, the 4th.
We traditionally have not invited them, but we certainly can extend that invitation to them if you'd like. So
good.
We unfortunately, if you recall, during this hearing, about half of or better of the comments we receive are people that have questions about why their value went up.
Yeah.
It's just from a sequencing perspective, we have to refer them to the local Board of Adjustment Appeals date for that consideration.
So quick questions on the kind of where we are for the budget. So part of what the fire inspector position was going to do was also training. I think you were looking for some assistance in the training coordinator role. What's the plan for 2018 in absence of hiring that role? It's been a while since we've talked about that, so what does that look like?
We're just going to work through it. We'll have to split some of the training up between the officers.
Okay.
In the past, we've had one guy that's been in charge of training, and we'll just split it up to all the officers. We'll take a portion of it.
Okay.
I think one of the discussion points between Chief Newman and the Joint Board was that it's important for whoever's doing the training to be a member of the department, so they're in tune with operations.
Agreed.
And you know, that may or may not have been something that was achievable with the appointment of the fire inspector, depending on whether that was an internal situation or external. So that was always a component of the position that was a nice to have, and you know, going forward would be good if we could accomplish that. But it really has to align with them being on the department too.
So the fire inspector role, I'm disappointed we're not going to pull the trigger entirely and do that in 18. I will take we are building towards that. I just think it's important to point out that we have a different, you know, multifamily residential situation than our partner in Columbus does. And so, you know, as we're doing pre-planning, I would just prefer us to have some teeth behind those pre-plans as we're seeing things. We don't have that today. I still think that's a deficit. Let's continue the conversation into 18. But I think it's still important that we ultimately build towards that.
Could I take this first? I think one of the difficulties is getting past what happened in the past. And I'm not saying that I don't think anybody disagrees with having a fire inspector. But one of the difficulties in this situation is between the setting of the preliminary levy and the October 30th meeting was that Columbus actually voted not to include it in their plan. And so the entire cost was going to be borne by the Forest Lake City Council decision, and we would have had to pay for the entire thing, including for Columbus. So I think that made it very challenging. The second piece I would add is that after we, when we had a very good discussion around pre-plan, and there's people who want to say, okay, what about setting up some type of pool of people who are contracted with the cities, who are licensed, and the people can go to them and we could actually get them done faster that way. But at the same time, what happens how do we monitor compliance at that point? So there was more discussion around that, but I think what ultimately came out of it was a real push to say we want to get all of the pre-plans done ASAP, and to put teeth behind it to actually increase the amount paid to somebody to actually do the pre-plans. After the pre-plans are in place, we're continuing the discussion to have a fire inspector for the 2018 year. I think that's, do you agree?
That's correct.
Sam, you were at the meeting. Do you kind of agree
Well,
with that?
that was certainly the discussion.
So I think I would have hoped we would have been able to get further, but I think this was the next best thing, if you will.
I also, as we have those conversations, if we're heading down a contractor route, let's have that conversation, because I think the hardest thing to contract is discretion. As I understand what some of the challenges have been in the past, you want somebody who's able to exercise discretion and make judgment, and it's very difficult to do that in a contract situation. Under contract, they tend to be more black and white. So again, if that's a path we're heading down, let's just have conversation on the board.
That was part of the discussion as well. You're absolutely right.
And I think start your conversation, all our multifamily residential is sprinkled. That's state code on everything.
That's good.
So
to start.
Maybe just one final comment, I think, on the joint board's discussion is that they really want to make, see movement on the pre-plans. They feel that's important. But also the thought process is that the pre-planning, getting through that 100% would set the table for what is our ultimate amount of inspection needed and how fast are we going to get through, each community and what cycles, because, you're going to have certain classes of property on a 2-year review and 3 and maybe 1. And so I think they were trying to get a better understanding of what's our universe of work out there. And they thought pre-planning would be a mechanism to help accomplish that.
Okay.
I think one of the other reasons, and you might have mentioned it when I was out, but we wanted to avoid the duplication of, you got a fire inspector coming out and asking some of the same things that Al is asking in the pre-plan. So if we could get pre-plan done, it would limit the amount of the fire inspector's got to do when he starts. And it would give him an outline to start with.
Right, we have an idea.
Is there any other questions on the budget in advance of the December 4th meeting?
So Aaron, sorry.
No, go ahead.
We had some discussion earlier about the street position, and originally that was going to be funded out of, I want to say, the water fund or something like that. Where did that end up? I mean, right, we put it, I think we temporarily put it in the general fund. Where is that right now?
I'm sorry, on what position was that?
The new streets position, the new streets?
Pond that we were.
Oh, well, so we have that position is currently within the Surface Water Management Fund, and we didn't necessarily reallocate that. So we're still going to have all of the activities within the Surface Water Management Fund, but we'll have a general fund contribution to it in order to mitigate the increase. And so when we were talking about the Surface Water Management Fund increase for this year, that was accounted for in previous year's budgets. What we were proposing was, I think it was $100,000 of revenue generation in the Stormwater Management Fund that the council preferred to not increase. And so that became a transfer of $100,000 from the general fund to surface water, but we were looking to initiate the pond cleaning program. So it was really kind of step one on that new activity. I guess, at least in my mind, or at least the way we had it set up, it wasn't associated with a position. It was mitigating or offsetting the desire to have that fee increase. But there was a desire to have the program increase, and so it'll be a transfer out of the general fund.
You and I might still be seeing this differently. My preference, unless someone can convince me otherwise, is that when people come to us and say, what do you do with that surface water position, or what do you do with that money? I want to point to the position to say that's where we pay it. So I'd rather it not be a general fund expense. I'd rather it come out of that surface water fund. So there's this direct correlation between the activity of the fund and the expenses that are being incurred. And I think from what I heard, that's where that position sits today, with some general fund contribution, so that there isn't we're not running that fund into a deficit position. Is that correct?
Yeah, so, again, that position was originally funded out of, and actually it hits a couple of different funds. It's got a water component, a sewer component, and a surface water management fund component. And, just so we can accurately account for all of our surface water management expenses, so at least on the expense side, we can say this is what we're putting into the program. It's important for us to do that from an MS4 perspective and other things. We'll account for all the expenses within the surface water management fund. It's just, it will have the additional revenue source of money coming from the general fund in lieu of, the desire to increase the charge in that area. So this budget, based on the last direction I felt I received from the council, reflects that not going ahead with a rate increase in surface water management and making a general fund contribution to that fund to allow for the initiation of the pond cleaning program.
So I'm in agreement with that. I don't know.
You're shaking your head.
Okay. Sounds good. There's still one big thing out there that I think we need to try to start is somehow funding gravel to blacktop. And, whether we create a fund and don't actually put any money in it till next year or do something, but I think we have to have a policy in place of what we're going to do, how much we're going to do, how much we're actually going to have a goal for that fund as an outlet to the questions that are out there. We're not going to get too many more roads paved without some type of city participation. So I think tonight's probably not the right time for that conversation, but we really do need to look at starting something and putting some money into it.
I would also add that for 7 years I've been talking about putting money into depreciation or for maintenance of buildings. This is a beautiful new building, yet we have nothing budgeted at all in case something breaks, other than the creativity of the department heads to figure out how we're going to pay for something. And we, that money needs to be put forward at some point in time. I think it's only government would get away with doing it because they can raise the revenue. A business couldn't do that. So I think we need to start looking at that as well. It's not going to happen in this budget, but we got to start thinking about that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Aaron, do we have any idea what maintenance in this building costs a year?
Mayor, members of council, so, there's a lot of ways you can handle this, and so as we've presented this as a policy discussion in the past, we've given you numbers, which are escaping me off the top of my head now, but we've given you numbers on a 30-year replacement cycle, what you'd need to contribute annually to account for general fund, buildings within that. We've given you, I think, a 50-year number as well. And, ultimately, certainly you can start to contribute that to a municipal land and buildings fund or something like we've recently created now with a capital equipment replacement fund. So I guess from a milestone perspective, this next year's budget represents our, kind of entry into the predominantly being fully pay-as-you-go from a capital equipment perspective, which wasn't always the case. I mean, we have been issuing equipment certificates on that in the past. So from that perspective, that is a big move forward. I think it's all, kind of a question of sequencing and prioritization for that next move. Clearly, we are paying, on the debt for the construction of this new building. One philosophy people would have with that is new buildings are beneficial and have a useful life over a 30-year period, 40-year period. Why don't you associate your debt with that, and then when you're in a position of needing to construct a new building, you can do so. However, if you want to maintain the long-term asset, you need to be funding maintenance and repair. So if you look at the expense side of things, we currently budget in our general fund at $281,960 is what's proposed. We have about 2 FTE out of that, and then the balance goes for maintenance and repairs in this building. So, there certainly is some level of investment, that's planned for things that come up in this building. That's our energy too, so be aware of that. So we do budget for day-to-day maintenance, cleaning carpets. If we had a capital improvement item, certainly we have to schedule that. We don't have a lot of that in here now, but if something breaks, we currently fix it.
Yeah, but 2 FTE is about $200,000.
A little under that, So there isn't a huge. I'm not saying there's no.
Right. I'm just saying. You're right. We got the money to clean the carpets and take care of the basics. Ben's talked for a while about a new maintenance garage. We've got nothing going towards that.
Right.
We have nothing in case something happened, unless it was an insurance claim on this building. If we had a $50,000 replacement for something, we would have, it's probably under warranty now, but if it was outside of warranty, we would have to come up with that. That's what I'm trying to talk about, is we need to start building that fund that will prevent the $23 million bond that happens next time to build the next building for the city if we don't end up using it. I think it's just prudent financial management.
And I agree with that. I think it's a good thing. In other communities I've worked in, we've worked toward an annual contribution. It's just, it's a sequencing, and we're just getting to pay as you go on capital equipment. And I think this is sort of a next generation discussion, and I think it's a good one to have.
Yeah, there's certain things that, eventually you're going to need a roof. You're going to need the parking lot repaved, and where's all that money? Other than take it out of general fund, where's it come from?
Right. I think those are definitely items you'd either annually budget for, depending on the level, or in the ideal world, you'd have a sinking, type of fund, or, somewhere where you're capturing depreciation, where you'd fund, major repairs like that. This project is a little unique in that if we repair the parking lot out there, it's cost shared with some of the properties around us, and so, we have that kind of working into the equation as well.
I hate to see us in a situation of the schools where everything was deferred, and then all of a sudden you're looking for $143 million.
No, agreed. Yep.
All right. So going back to roads. What money is going in there now? Just a franchise fee, is that all?
Franchise fee.
Well, it depends on what, there is a couple different categories of road maintenance. We had the policy discussion. There's a 2-part discussion on that. Again, that was a policy discussion last summer. Policy discussion 1 is, how do you want to finance it? So right now we're 100% assessment. And when you're talking about going in to do that, you're not going to meet the statutory requirements for the creation of value there. And so, realistically, you're going to have to get that number down. We gave you scenarios on 70% assessment and I believe 50% assessment if the city was wanting to be a contributor to that. And you can ultimately pick your number there. Let's say you're going to go 70% assessment, you can put that out there and see what projects are initiated by petition. You'll see some of that. You'll see more of that at 50%. So to a point, you're going to have to start out and see, what type of projects might be self-initiated, or if you want to be in the business of council-initiated projects, Generally speaking, our perspective has been that we are waiting, and we want resident, at least the 51% threshold for abutting properties to come in with that. But you can certainly do it on a more proactive basis. Many communities do that. They say, we're going to pave every gravel road, and this is our sequence. You've seen communities recently say, this is the number, we're going to bond for it and pay for it over this period of year, and some of it's going to be repaid with special assessments as much as you can sustain with the value creation, and then the balance is going to have to be captured with the general fund with an identified funding source. So we've done some scenarios that give you a phasing schedule on how that could be accomplished. It's just really gets down to what's your tolerance for bringing that assessment threshold down, and what's your tolerance for generating the revenue to do that. Back to your original question, Councilmember Eigner, we have approximately a little over $700,000 a year that goes into our local road program, which for the most part is funded mill and overlay projects. We also have money within our general fund that is captured for our seal coating program, and that's above and beyond the mill and overlay project amount for that maintenance activity. And then we have that schedule that we keep for state aid roads and or cost participation projects, which is our other segment of transportation finance.
But we have nothing for paving additional roads.
Not at this point in time. So, additional gravel to pave scenarios, we do not have anything earmarked for that.
Kind of like the discussion we had with the developer tonight.
Yeah, we do not have anything specific outlined. I think when we had the policy discussion in August, we laid out some one-time options that might be, Ryan noted that we had some additional state aid revenue coming in above and beyond our normal. So there's maybe that option. I think there's a couple other items that are escaping me. Ryan, do you recall what those are?
So obviously we've implemented the franchise fees a long time ago and set that dollar amount at $700,000 to go towards the local project annually. As we've increased households or businesses, that has increased, a little bit over time. So we're actually collecting more than we're spending. So that could be money allocated towards future gravel projects as one of the opportunities.
That's like 30, 40,000, or somewhere in that ballpark, right? Yeah.
That doesn't go very far in a road.
So I know that we have a reserve requirement of about 50%. And if I remember correctly, we're somewhere around 56 or 57% at this point. Is some of that able to be used as a one-time to put into like a fund to start something like this? So it's redesignated rather than being reserves, it's redesignated into this type of reserve fund.
With no levy impact?
With no levy impact, thank you.
So, Mayor's Council, that is correct. We could quantify that number for you, and we've looked into that. That certainly is potential for some level. We are, for a while there, we had a number of items that were impacting that, and we've got the airport paving issue we're dealing with, and so we had some externalities that we were trying to figure out there. But it certainly is a legitimate conversation for one-time funding. I think the thing you have to be cognizant of, though, is you're going to do a policy shift here. And so you can start it off and jumpstart it in a way, but you have to be prepared for assuming the responsibility in the long term if you go from 100% assessment to 50% assessment, for example. And you just got to be in a position to want to sustain that going forward. So.
Well, and I think that's, the strongest point is, how much do we as a city want to participate on each and every road? And, there's 30 miles of unpaved road. Is there 10 miles of that really should be paved? Is there 10 miles it could be? And the last 10 is going to always stay dirt, So every road has its parameters to it, but I would think that if we, set up a policy, are we going to pay a third and each landowner pay a third minimum? But there's some roads that should be paved that, have long stretches of wetlands on them. That's where I think, we're going to have to come up with some more of that.
Also, some thoroughfares that, you know, some feeder roads that, you know,
So do you-
Harrow, for example. And it might be a while before that.
But you went through a
Yeah.
whole exercise of prioritizing roads. Is there, I mean, if you had the money, how would you say which one gets done first?
I would pick your roads that are along your lakes. You know, we've talked about water quality all night up earlier, and, you know, we got all that gravel running off into the streams and filling in stuff right there. You got tight corners backing up, turning, so, you know, those are the areas that are ideal for the pavement. You know, we did the double chip seal last year out in the rural area. You know, we think it's going to perform very well out there. We took a little chance on Forest Road, but I mean, see how it will hold up. If it holds up there, it's going to hold up in a lot of those other areas too. And you know, that's where we can gain some ground out in those rural areas that aren't going to see development anytime in our lifetime, just where they are located. Perfect example of a road that probably should be paved, Heath Avenue on the north side of First Lake. We got a lot of traffic going through there, and you know, that's one. 224th up north of Second Lake, just northeast of Aqua. Imperial, you know, on the south side of the lake, and neighborhoods like that. That's where I would focus on, you know, your first extents, because some of those rural areas that we talked about, if the shape and pave or the double chip seal works well out there, that's still going to be ideal for those, because you got such huge parcels and you can't possibly assess one property owner what you would assess somebody in these higher density areas. And maybe just ease of simplicity, you come in with a flat fee assessment, you get people sign waivers so you don't go through the 429 process and all that cost of a project. You know, we have tagged on some people to some of the local non-overlay projects if they signed a waiver and paved some portions of gravel roads here and there. Did it really cheaply that way, but I would focus on those short segments along the lake, or that have a lot of turning movement, high traffic, compared to your other gravel roads. I would stay clear of the 190th and Fenway, because if you do come in with an assessment project and you assess them, but then you gotta
tear it up
right away, 5-10 years, come back and do all the utility and the street works to meet the demands that's coming with the growth that's so close, you can't really assess that person again until you get Rule of thumb is till you get what you have in our, I think it's 20 years that we have stated in our assessment policy, so you would wait 20 years to assess them. You can always try to assess. Do you want to deal with appeals too? So
it's, in some regards, transferring the money, creating the fund, that's the easy part. It's the conversation on selecting the projects and the prioritization.
That's why I asked the question, how would you prioritize what gets done first?
I would look at the neighbors. What percent of those neighborhoods is already developed? Or are you going to have a lot of new construction coming and going? You know, because you don't want to assess a road and have half the units filled, and all of a sudden now people come in and they tear up the road that you just did. You know, that's probably a little extreme in the areas we're talking. So I'd look at density, existing households, other effects, benefits, water quality, turning movements, grading trips, you know, all these little pockets here and there around areas in such a short segment of road. Let's just knock those out. You know, it's one thing to just go down a rural road and grade it, but to back in and out of these tight corners that have a lot of,
to drive all the way over there to do one short
take longer
stretch
to
of
do than
road.
the longer stretches sometimes.
So we need two things. We need a plan and we need money.
We need a plan, we need money. Well, if we...
But the money aspect, we don't have to make the decision to reallocate some of that fund balance, if you will, until next year, so we can work on the plan over the next couple of months, and then look at how we fund it with that. So that doesn't have to be done with the budget process.
Would we be able to charge, you know, say, a different building permit fee for roads we pave those areas versus unpaved roads? Or, I mean, is that something that building permit fee is fixed across the whole city? I'm just, you know, like an area charge or something, but, I mean, if we come in first and pave the roads, obviously, development is gonna follow, and how do we recover that without imposing it on property owners who may not wanna participate?
You could do a deferred assessment, is that what you're gonna maybe speak on?
Right. Yeah, so I mean, the area charges, there's been a lot of recent litigation, you know, in that area, and so area charges really aren't something, you know, that we're continuing to do at this point. Really, your option is a deferred assessment, and so you can put the assessment on, and your more typical example is going to be in a larger undivided parcel that has the potential for subdivision. So when you go through and assess it, you're going to assess it based on its potential future, and you go from there. Now, as you talk to the city attorney, one of the things they're going to tell you about assessment is the value is created partially through the road, but the real value is created through the extension of utilities. And so, you know, if you have a $16,000 per lot road, and you might be able to make a good argument for $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 of that to be accessible. The balance then becomes your responsibility in terms of what's defensible, and it's in some cities they actually appraise each one. Each assessment project is appraised, and the appraiser will tell you, you know, this is the value creation based on the level of improvements that you're providing here.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Thanks. We'll move on.
Okay. Ryan, are those gravel roads you talked about around the lake? We already have. I mean, we have. Are there water lines or anything? There's our own well, right?
So just so you know, when you're thinking about gravel roads and what we have for utilities, you know, mostly all the stuff around the lake is sewered. Anything east of Harrow does not have city water. Anything north of the dam on North Shore Trail doesn't have water. So North Shore to then pick up Harrow across and over, it doesn't have water.
And no plans of water going in there?
I mean, in the comp plan, but how are we gonna?
I'd hate to do what we were just talking about before. You put a road in there and then, 5 years later, we're gonna put water in there.
So like the Harrow, Healy, Heath, all that area is, you know, within the water comprehensive plan, right? I guess, would the initiative of the council wanna go do public engagement and extend water through those neighborhoods where it's already a defined neighborhood? We haven't had that conversation.
Yeah, if I read you correct, you could assess, it'd bring more value to the property, right?
Well, in that condition, it's more difficult because they've already got access to water. So how much value are you really creating? The value comes in the pre-development condition, especially with sewer, because sewer is more difficult to deal with, and creates more value because it's more costly to install. And you can get more density with your lot development that way. So, you know, I think that's more of the thing. I don't know. In terms of retrofitting existing neighborhoods, typically what you're going to see with that is there's some water problem that impacts a broader base of the people that are on wells. They might have picked up, name a contaminant, whatever it is, and it's beneficial for them to get off the well systems.
All right.
Fee schedule, are you ready to move into that?
Yeah, let's move on to the fee schedule.
Okay. So Mayor, members of council, obviously the budget is always predicated on the fee schedule to a certain extent, so we do try to get that adopted by the end of the year. There's not a lot of changes here. I would just kind of go back up to my memo here and talk about that. We did have a few items that were adjusted. One, if you look within the schedule, there's some areas that are highlighted in orange. I did put those down as areas that would be a good opportunity for the council to have a policy discussion. a lot of these, almost all of these fees have some basis, no different than the committees and commissions. They come from somewhere. And so if you adjust the fee, it doesn't necessarily, or eliminate it, it doesn't necessarily make it go away. There's an underlying ordinance that drives it, or there's a building code that drives it. So I did put some of those in orange. That would be good policy discussions for the council. Also, note that we do have within our leases, it is the year that we would review our ground leases at the airport. That's subject to review in March of this year. So the Airport Commission will consider that at that point in time and make a recommendation to the council. If you were to make an adjustment at that time, the fees would require, or an ordinance would need to be adopted there. There is a fee that's proposed for elimination. That's the appeal fee under planning and zoning. That's based on previous council feedback. So in the case of someone wanting to bring forward an appeal, like we saw with the site plan out here on lot 5, the ordinance actually, or the code requires them to pay a fee. That wasn't really the intent when that was adopted, so that's proposed for elimination. There is a proposed increase for police fingerprinting. Right now we charge $10. It's somewhat of a labor-intensive process, and because our charge is so low, we actually become a little bit of a magnet for people that want to get fingerprinted for a number of occupations and things like that. For whatever reason, the word is out that we're the place to get fingerprinted because our fee is $10, and in many jurisdictions that's not the case. So we get a lot of people external to Forest Lake coming here to be fingerprinted. So that was kind of interesting to know.
That's more to drive than what they save.
Yeah.
Because it's the one time I want to increase a fee.
We, in our ongoing effort to make the fee schedule smaller, we consolidated a number of the public works charges down into some bands, as opposed to, we had a number of ranges before for each individual piece of equipment. So we were trying to consolidate the schedule a little bit. And then a couple of other items. One fee was increased slightly in public works to reflect actual cost. And then there was one that was reduced considerably also just to reflect actual costs. So that was the lockable valve box from $400 some to $76. Biggest item in here is the increase of water and sewer rates, both by 6%. And as the council's talked about that in the past, that is to reflect future capital needs within both of those systems. And it's difficult for us to keep pace operationally in the sewer fund, and the Met Council is, in that 4 to 6, 8% range as far as their processing charge increase to us. And so we also have projects that we are planning on and have also actually taken place in the sewer fund, for example, with our lift station project that require that level of rate increase. So that's reflected in the attached fee schedule. I guess with that, I'm happy to stand for any specific questions that you have and be happy to answer those.
How much is the Met Council raising their fees this time?
I believe, I will have to double check, but I believe it was 5% was what we projected. Dave, do you recall that at all? Or
5.2 or something like that.
And that's something that needs to get out, because most of the increase that we're looking at is a result of the Met Council not controlling their costs over the number of years. So I think we just got to remind people of that, because people look at the council and say, hey, you raised it that much, but it's really, most of it's the Met Council, if not all.
Large portion of our operating budget in sewer is just really, our processing charges are in excess of $1 million. I believe they're like $1.3 million now. And so, a significant portion of what we're doing in sewer is just strictly cutting a check based on metered, sewer going to the processing station. So these couple of items are orange. They're policy questions, and in a lot of cases, they're not real significant revenue generators. At a point in time, there was a discussion where it was thought that doing these would be a good idea. Maybe that shifted, and so, I think some of these could be legitimate policy questions. Dog licenses, for example, right now are $10. The policy reason why you'd want to have that in place is, I think in the old days it was a way to get especially pre-microchip, it was a way to get a hold of dog owners. It was also a way to ensure that the rabies vaccinations have been accomplished. To be honest, our level of compliance on this is very low. I think at one point I had understood that it was in the hundreds of dogs that we had actually licensed. And so if you think about how many dogs you'd expect to be in Forest Lake, it's not a majority of the dogs that are actually getting licensed right now. So, and Rick and I have not talked about, the police's perspective on this. I'm throwing it out there. I think it's a legitimate policy discussion, given our low rate of compliance and what we're really accomplishing. I think you can have an ordinance that says dogs shall be vaccinated. It's an expectation, but whether we have to actually license that is another question.
Rick, if a dog is not vaccinated and they bite somebody, is there state laws against that or anything else?
Yeah, there's a state statute, and we actually reach out to our animal control officer. She's really well versed in all the laws and everything else, so a lot of times we let her handle that portion of it, but yeah, we will issue citations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This $10 fee, Aaron, sometimes it costs more money to implement the fee than it does to collect it. Where are we at with that?
It'd be an accurate assessment on that fee.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
What's the fertilizer application for? Is that for a company that applies?
So in this case, and there's a number of these, of course. The fertilizer pesticide application is, we have an ordinance that says if you're going to be an applicator, you ought to be licensed here. I think the idea on that is that, we know they're licensed and insured, and, when they apply the product, that there's been some vetting or whatever that's happened on that. Again, I can't guarantee that all companies are compliant with that.
That's annual one fee?
They pay it one time. And
the whole city? Or do business in the city?
To do business in the city, correct.
That's not much.
Yeah. And plumbing license, for example, not required in the building code to have a plumbing license. In this particular case, we do have a requirement that you be licensed in Forest Lake to be a plumber. One idea on that is it's designed to manage competition. There's a barrier to entry into Forest Lake, so you're not just going to be come in here and do one job and leave or whatever, that there's some, track record of you in the community. But yeah, I think they're fair conversations. These aren't huge generators. If you wanted to have more conversation on these items, we could do that at future workshops, give you an idea of how much revenue is generated, what the policy basis is behind these. But I'm just saying right now in our code, we have a requirement that you get a plumbing license. So we have a fee for that.
I would recommend that we talk about the dog license, getting rid of the dog license one. As far as the gambling license one, is this the the pull tabs and all that stuff too, or is it just for the one-time event things?
I think, Dan, is that the one time?
Yeah, there's actually two. So one is for the code is silent on if you have a pull tab location at, say, Friar Tuck's, you pay the $50 annual fee, but it also affects if you're doing a benefit raffle, you have to pay the $50 fee for that raffle to have the state sign up or the city sign up on the permit before it goes to the state. And we can't differentiate at this point. So if you're doing a one-time, the fees on both of them.
So literally you could have one place have to, put on multiple benefit raffles, pay $500 in a year, and Friar Tuck's pays $50 for 365 days of sales.
Correct. Yeah, the way it is right now. So anytime you do a bingo permit or like turkey bingo at the church is a big one, they have to pay the $50 fee to the city. But I believe they get that from the state since they're a registered nonprofit. The state does not charge them for that. So in essence, if you're trying to do a fundraiser, it's kind of a prohibitive thing with the $50 fee. And the way it sits right now, the code basically is silent on if we treat everybody the same, we have to give a charge everybody that $50.
That makes sense, thank you. I'd get rid of it.
Why do we charge for this one that you got highlighted, swing away mailbox?
That highlight is just that there was an adjustment in the fee. So it was previously like $100, and our cost for that is $135. Dave, does that sound right?
It was 109, but they changed it to installed, so we put it in for the 135 instead of just giving them the mailbox that they don't know how to put up correctly, and then they fall over anyway, so.
So we're putting them in, or?
We'll put them in.
Really?
Yeah. Air compressor and 2 bolts. We can do it a lot quicker, and in the winter as well. We can drive it right through the frost and get it in. And that's usually when they get knocked down, is in the winter, so.
We're not just doing it, are we doing it universally, or are we just doing it in cases where a mailbox has been knocked down?
If a resident wants to put one in, yeah.
Okay.
That's nice. What, the taxi and limousine, there's only a couple companies.
You know, again, I think legitimate policy discussion, I think that's why it's highlighted is, you know, is this something that it's not a revenue thing. The logic, you know, that you're going to hear about on why you'd want to do it is when taxi companies were more of a thing and there was barriers to entry in that business and pre-Lyft and Uber and things like that, you would background check the people in the company and things like that and know that they're licensed and insured, but that ship's kind of sailed at this point, so.
I agree with the previous recommendation that we kind of bring these back for further council workshop conversation.
I agree.
That's a lot to pull out.
Otherwise, our goal would be to get this noticed in our ordinance publication for the December 4th meeting if we still have time for that. We have this new 10-day notice or whatever we have to do for ordinances, or 14, I don't remember, is it?
10. Or we could do it in, or you could do it in January right away.
Yeah.
Just get rid of the ones that are highlighted and
I can't
go through more, or you want to?
Can't with some of them.
Okay.
That's what he was just talking about.
Right.
So, anyway.
Well, it just changed, yeah.
Yeah.
The money, that $280 at the airport too, Aaron, bring that up for a second. And that was kind of based on whether or not we could prove we had the cash flow out there to take care of that. Haven't we done that? I mean, you know, it was kind of based on like one hangar a year being built and that kind of thing. There was a kind of an outline of that. This year there's at least 4 or 5 that were done, and there's 3 more that are going to be started within days. And it seems like that cash flow has increased.
So Mayor Members,
as exactly what we had predicted.
So Mayor Members Council on that front, you know, the rent structure for, you know, non-commercial leased land is $11 per square foot, and then a flat charge of $280 per unit. We do have benchmarks on, you know, rent levels for other airports that you'll have the opportunity to review when we go through the setting of the rent in March. Well, Councilmember Husnick brings up a good point in one of the working discussions that I was hoping to have with the Airport Commission is they do have a fund balance at this point. And would there be an opportunity to, you know, basically buy down that obligation and put it in a position where you could consider adjusting the rent at that point. But you're in a situation where there's uncertainty with the airport with the, you know, kind of outstanding issue on the paving and the about $400,000 that we have on that. And so if you want to segregate those issues, I think you certainly can. Or you can wait to find resolution on our litigation. So it's your discussion.
One of the issues with the cost overrun, that has nothing to do with the Airport Commission or the City Council or the hangar owners or anybody else. It's a totally separate issue as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, granted, I hope the litigation works in our favor, but it has nothing to do with the hangar owners or the airport commission or the city council. There was the engineers that stood right up there and told us that everything was on schedule and on budget. And we heard that over and over and over again. I think Ed can concur with that. And so, I mean, to me, it's a totally separate issue.
Even I agree with you on that, Sam.
Is there a like a fund balance they have to maintain out there, or not?
There's a guideline that we've discussed, and so this is just off the top of my head. I'd have to pull the audit, but I believe they had a fund balance of approximately $130,000, and you know, annual operations are, you know, in about that range. And so even if you brought it back to like a 50% level, you know, a good portion of this discussion, you know, would be addressed. It really is a policy question on the part of the council. If you're open to utilizing some portion of existing fund balance to resolve the $280 issue, it's an option for you. It just, whatever, and I believe there's about $50,000 that's currently outstanding there. So within the existing fund balance, but for the, you know, there is an obligation out there of $400,000 that, you know, the general fund is going to have to absorb, or future airport operations is going to have to absorb. You have to make that policy decision. And my only suggestion to you is that you make that policy decision before you make the decision to buy down, you know, the airport fund balance. So I think it's fair. It's fair conversation for you to have. You can have it now. You can have it in conjunction with the Airport Commission's rent recommendation in March. It's your decision.
Hopefully, we'll have a resolution on that thing by then, I hope, with this litigation. Any possibility of that?
I would say no.
No? Great.
Just to be honest about it.
You want to go with the short answer, huh?
Yeah.
Be in, what do they call it? Discovery?
Just so you're aware, there is a closed session scheduled to give you an update on that at the next meeting.
Which is the 28th?
Next Monday.
27th.
27th?
Yeah, next Monday.
So I am open to the conversation on what do we do with the $280 rent increase. I would prefer that we have that as part of the overall conversation with leases and the schedule in March. I don't feel like we're prepared to have that conversation between now and when we need to approve this fee schedule.
I don't know how the airport got that high a fund balance. I mean, we were, I guess I'd like to, you know, just run the numbers and see. We're not going to be able to do it tonight, but the original agreement was $150,000 was coming from the airport to pay for the runway. $150,000 was coming from the general fund. Out of that $150,000 the airport was going to pay for, they had like $65,000 available in cash, and we were fronting the rest, and that's where that $280 per unit was coming out of. You know, if they've got the fund balance now and it's not costing the city, I mean, I think, you know, the original agreement. What's that?
Where would they get it? I mean, the egg
Well,
crafts
they're saying the fund balance is high right now.
No, well, and so it's.
He did. You didn't say that.
You have some discretion there, or you have some room there. Part of it is they've had positive operations. You know, I mean, they budget for a certain level of expenditures. The expenditures have come in good. There hasn't been a lot of cost participation types of things they've had to deal with, minus the paved runway, which, you know, there was a financing plan that was established for that. Right. You know, there was positive fuel sales, positive egg rent. You saw some egg rent increases there, although that's becoming a declining commodity. And I think, you know, as part of the discussion, you know, you have to be aware of is some of the revenue sources, whether it be Hangar E, what the final disposition is there, our egg rent, you know, becomes less and less, even with like the Headwaters Parkway project. All of a sudden there's 5 more acres of egg rent that's not in the equation any longer. And so that eventually is going to go away. It's not, you know, a long-term, you know, revenue source for for the airport. Now, hopefully there's others that, you know, come in and like we've talked about, lot development happened much quicker. We did get a higher level of MnDOT maintenance contribution than we originally projected, and we're still able to make that capital contribution for future pavement costs. So we're doing a pavement reserve within there. So it's just it's a variety of little factors. It wasn't one particular one.
Okay.
To go along with that, I think we're going to have to talk, this is going to be something in the future, but we're going to have to talk about some sort of expansion out there. I really honestly believe that. And
I'd like to see it.
And then every time you get more hangars in there, it's more tax based too. I mean, yeah, of course it doesn't go into that fund, but it still benefits the city and the school and the county and everybody else every time you pay taxes out there.
Well, I guess I'd like to start some type of waiting list, or, you know, if people want to put something down. You know, I'd like to see 10 or 15 people on a list before we start really.
Well, it's something to think about, and I think we can, you know, we'd probably get state help to do that too, you know, that kind of thing.
We'd have to look for at our, and you know, Councilmember Husnick's probably more familiar with this than I am, but I'm not sure the current airport layout plan contemplates that next area. And so there is like a whole process about how you go through and amend that airport layout plan, and so you have to make a real determination on where that would be and go through that process. And so that might be something for the commission to put in their CIP, because that would involve some consultant work.
There's been some general discussion about it, but nothing, you know, which way you would go with it, that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Mike.
So,
I agree that we need to start having this discussion for the March votes, but I think we need to start in January because it took that long last time to have discussions on it. So, but I don't disagree that doing it in conjunction with the airport leases is a good idea.
Yeah, sounds good. Any other discussion?
Is it too much to bundle into that conversation about the leases? Also some conversation around future of rent or future of a rental option out there, tying into our previous conversation of
I think it's part of the total discussion. I really do, yeah. Because if you're not going to go that way, then we should be using that space for more hangars. Right. But the problem is there's no utilities, and there's taxiway, but there's no utilities. Yep. So that it'd have to be put in there, and you'd have to add a taxiway.
Yes.
But that's all something for discussion, future discussion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah, can I just give you one other update?
Sure.
We are planning on if it works for the council, we've been engaging with FLA and on the whole Fenway Fields maintenance issue, and I think they're agreeable to an agreed upon third-party vendor for the maintenance activities there. We're working on that back and forth with them right now as far as what a proposal and cost would look like and how it would work. So when we get to that joint workshop, it can be a productive discussion about, you know, this is a working recommendation. And we're projecting to have that on December 11th. That previously was a city council night, but that typically is one that we might have canceled. So just wanted to confirm that that was okay for folks. And we'd look to have that joint meeting on that evening if that's all right.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. My apologies for having to
Same to you.
come and go
Happy
about
Thanksgiving.
5 times tonight.